prepared. Explain tackle, biggest value add. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so welcome to KubeCon Valencia, KubeCon Europe 2022. This is the second day of interviews here. I am joined by Tim Davis, who's the developer advocate at M0, is that correct?
DevOps advocate, I guess, is the official title, but yeah, basically DevRel.
Yeah. Why don't you explain tacos to start, because tacos is not something that everybody's familiar with. It kind of became a term right around, I don't know, peak Terraform, peak sort of infrastructure as code. Yeah. And not everyone, I think there's a lot of engineers out there who they're just doing Terraform, which is a sad thing. And tacos is something that can help them. Can you explain?
Absolutely. So tacos is essentially an acronym for Terraform Automation and Collaboration Software. There's lots of platforms out there that can automate Terraform, like, general CI/CD and stuff like that. But a tacos platform specifically is a platform designed and purpose-built to automate the life cycle of Terraform. Not just, with CI/CD, it's kind of stateless, it runs the pipeline and it's done with it. Well, with the tacos platform, it's stateful because Terraform is stateful. So we're really focused on the entire life cycle from deploy to destroy. And when you talk about tacos platforms, there's really only 4 of us in the group: M0, Spacelift, Scalar, and of course, Terraform Cloud.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. We'll talk a little bit about how M0 compares to those other solutions a little bit later. Luckily, you're the only tacos to appear today, so we'll be very pro M0 on the stream. So, can we talk a little bit about one of the problems that I got my start in Terraform as a sort of DevOps engineer. I remember one of my first interviews was, look, we don't care anything else that you know how to do, just as long as you can do our Terraform, right? Yeah. If you could do that, you're hired. So I said, okay, yeah, sure, one of the problems as a DevOps engineer that I kept sort of running into with Terraform was that it was quite easy to get started with Terraform, but then somebody else, some other engineer might poke it or prod it or do a manual change in the cloud, and then suddenly you do a second run, and now you have to do state surgery. Can you maybe sort of explain the process of state surgery, and then afterwards explain how M0 can help there?
Exactly right. So state surgery it's so bad. It's awful. Having to go through and essentially manually edit your state file so that it coincides with what's actually deployed, it's not common practice, but it happens a lot, and it's really bad. It's a pain. Nobody likes to see that. The way that we help solve that problem is with drift detection. So drift is essentially the word that stands for the difference between what's in the state file and what's actually in the cloud. So instead of verifying the state and modifying the state, we like to come from the other side. So what we'll do is when we enable drift detection on a workload, we're going to go through and we're going to run a Terraform plan every hour, every day, every week, however much you think you might need it, and we're going to tell you, hey, this is drifted. Best practices with Terraform is your Git repository, whatever that code is in there, that is your single source of truth. Whatever is in that repository is what production should look like. If somebody's going in and editing stuff in the cloud, that's not correct. So what you should be doing at that point is then redeploying, making it back to what it should be so that you clear that drift. Then do it correctly. Open up a pull request, change the code so that it matches, merge that back, and make that redeploy. So drift detection for us, it's a big deal. Lots of folks are using it. It's pretty much the default. And it just helps you make sure that what matches the Git repository, what matches the states, what's out in the cloud.
Interesting. So you mentioned that M0 can sort of run on a timer and continuously run those plans, ensure that state hasn't drifted. Is is N0 then able to sort of notify, let's say like for chat ops, are you able to get a hook into Slack and notify the team when drift is detected?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And so you actually just said two words there. You said Slack and you said team, but what about Microsoft Teams? They're right over there. They'd love us to talk about it. So we actually have chat ops with Slack and with Teams. You can set up the webhooks, get the notifications, not just that something's drifted, but also it will let you know, like when somebody's deploying something new, it will say, so-and-so started a deployment in production of this template. It's got a nice little link. You can click to it. You can go see what's going on, especially if you've got, like for production, where you have things set where it requires an extra set of approvals. You don't want to be sitting around looking at a dashboard all day waiting for something to approve. So not only will we send you an email letting you know that, hey, you've got something to approve, we'll shoot you a message on Slack, we'll ping you and say, hey, you've got something that needs to be approved. You click that button, it automatically takes you straight into the UI. It pulls up the plan so you can look at the plan. Right underneath that is going to be our infra cost run, so you can see how much that change is going to cost you. And then you've got a perfect access right there to the approve button so that you can either approve it or deny it and let it go.
Yeah, you mentioned infra cost. Yep. That's really interesting. And they're a partner of yours, I believe, yes. Providing that sort of cost estimation. Yep. I mean, one of the things I've seen at actually my last company was just ballooning cloud costs. And we didn't have a FinOps team, so management would just ping us every month and ask us sort of desperately, why has our cloud spend gone up 33%? And we weren't really able to tell them because we weren't FinOps. We were really part of the DevOps team that was just deploying the infrastructure, right? So that's something that doesn't really come with Terraform. Yep. And can you explain that a little bit more, that feature?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and in fact, something that differentiates us from the other Tacos platforms is we're not just doing cost estimation. We're doing the total cost. So, all of our competitors, and some of them actually running infra cost, they're able to estimate. So whenever you have a plan run, it'll tell you, hey, this is what it's probably going to cost you to deploy this application. Our thing is on the other side of that, what is it actually costing you? So we have an open source piece of our platform called TerraTag that during the deployment we will tag all of the taggable resources, deploy them out into the cloud, and then with read-only access to your billing API, we can then scrape those tags and be able to tell you not only what the estimation is, but what the actual cost is. The reason that those two numbers might be different is usage. For things like Lambda functions and stuff like that, you don't really know how much it's going to cost you until you instantiate the instance and run the thing a million times. Right. So it's good to know, hey, this is what we think it's going to cost you, this is what it's actually costing you. So for us, it's just an overall picture to help you make a better decision on if you should hit that approve button or not.
And that not only cost estimation, but actual cost, that's something that's exclusive to N0 then?
Yes, so we're the only ones in our little niche group that are doing the actual cost after the fact and not just doing cost estimation before.
Interesting. What would you say that the biggest value add to a customer, or it can also be your favorite feature of N0, would be for the audience? If somebody's wondering, okay, how. It could also be, how am I going to sell this to the uppers? The infra cost sounds like a great way of as we were speaking of off camera earlier, selling up. Exactly. But what would you say your favorite feature is from a DevOps engineer's perspective?
So my favorite feature is kind of our secret sauce, and that's our custom flows. We have the ability to drop a YAML file inside of the repository and script it to say, at any point in this process, like say before the Terraform plan, after the Terraform plan, after a successful deployment, we can script in bash commands to just do literally whatever you want. So if we're talking about things like continuous verification, we're able to come through and make a budget check and say, hey, how much is this costing you? Are we within budget? Otherwise we'll cancel out. Also, if you want to utilize third-party services to bring security into the picture, like TFSec, or if you want to run checkout by bridge crew, if you want to run open policy agent, we're able to help you script in pretty much any tool you want into any part of the process so that we can be extensible for all of those other different teams. If you want security, you want networking, you want anybody else that's involved in the process, great. String that into every single deployment so that, like you mentioned earlier, you don't get yelled at by finance before, because if you ship that stuff left into the deployment process, you're going to know about issues before they happen instead of after.
Right, right. You mentioned scripting into, for example, Open Policy Agent by Styra, I believe, right? Is that the company that's...
Yeah, so a lot of the folks at Styra work on upstream Open Policy Agent.
Right, right. What's the USP of something like Open Policy Agent for DevOps teams? Why would they want to ensure permissions, or maybe we could step back a little bit and explain sort of what Open Policy Agent is trying to do.
So Open Policy Agent is policy as code. You have security that's telling you, hey, you can only do this kind of firewall policy and stuff like that. Well, it's a little bit different than Open Policy Agent. You can do security with it, but it's also compliance, it's guardrails and things like that. So for instance, if you have compliance needs where you only have to stay in a certain region in AWS, or if you only want to control like costing by saying they can only deploy small, medium, and large instances and not extra large, Open Policy Agent allows you to write specific policy and essentially guardrails so that every single one of those deployments checks, makes sure that it's within that policy, and then it will either continue or not. And the good news about that is that it's not just a bunch of like set parameters. You pretty much write policy for anything you want. As most of us know, if you're going out and deploying stuff into the cloud, you want, say, a new EC2 instance from AWS. There's a million different options that you go through when you click through that. All of that could have a policy written, like that has to be enabled or that has to be disabled. No open CIDR blocks inside of your VPCs and stuff like that.
Or don't deploy to default.
Exactly right. And it allows you to make sure that you're keeping those guardrails on and staying secure every single time so that you don't get yelled at a month later when somebody finds out.
And how does that sort of weave in with N0? Because I believe that N0 has been pushing that feature ahead as something that they support.
Absolutely, and it's one of those things where when we start working with customers and figuring out what their needs are and solving their problems, we end up having to go in for things like a security review and working with the networking team to figure out what they want to do. When you're working with any automation product in general, there's going to be a lot of different stakeholders involved, because in order to get an entire application or service out the door, there's a lot of different folks involved. With Open Policy Agent, that helps make sure that you're giving your compliance folks and your security folks and everybody the warm and fuzzies that while they are kind of letting go of the reins, so to speak, to allow people to deploy what they want when they want, they know that their parameters and their rules are still going to be met.
Interesting. Can we compare N0 to some of the other tacos? For example, maybe we can start, actually, HashiCorp is right behind us.
This is perfect.
Yeah.
I'm a Hashi ambassador, it's all right.
HashiCorp, of course, has authors of Terraform, open source, widely used within the industry. I would say it's sort of industry standard for infrastructure as code.
It is.
And one of their business-oriented products is Terraform Cloud, which is sort of on top. It allows you to do things like you can toss in secret variables in there that you wouldn't otherwise commit to code. You can do GitOps style deployment runs. Now, unfortunately, Terraform Cloud is very expensive. I mean, actually, most HashiCorp enterprise products.
Yes.
I mean, I once tried to sell Vault to my last company, and the finance team just couldn't understand how it could be so expensive.
Exactly right.
It was right up there with Datadog, if not more expensive than Datadog. So I'm sure we have some horror stories to share there. But so I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that N0 not only gives you a broader feature set, but is also generally priced lower. Is that correct?
Yes, we absolutely are. And with us, we call ourselves a tacos for the Terraform automation collaboration, but we don't just focus on Terraform. We are extensible with Pulumi. If you want to use TerraGrunt, if you want to use, CloudFormation templates. As of this week, we're announcing native Kubernetes support for utilizing kubectl for deployments and things like that.
Oh, that's interesting.
But when it comes to cost, I love HashiCorp. They're great. They have done so much for the community and everything like that with Terraform, but they have what I like to call the open source problem. Funding the maintenance of Terraform open source that doesn't make them any money is very expensive. Now, there's only one business way to solve that. The products that you sell, they're going to be a little more overpriced to offset that.
Right.
And I'm sure if they didn't have to do that, they wouldn't do that, but it's just kind of a thing that they have to deal with. But that means we get to reap the benefits of that, and we just get to utilize Terraform open source without actually having to pay for it.
Right.
So it's one of those things where all of the other tacos platforms are going to be cheaper simply because we don't have to maintain Terraform open source.
That's a really good point, and not something I had considered.
Yeah. It's not cheap. They have entire groups of some of the greatest engineers on the planet working on that, and they're paying them to work on a free product.
Right. Well, so how would M0 then compare to some of the other tacos? For example, like Spacelift. Sure. We were supposed to get an interview with them today, but they weren't able to fit it in their schedule. Otherwise, it would have been an interesting, a little head-to-head. But
that's great. I'll thank them later.
Yeah, absolutely. So Spacelift, Scalar. Yep. And who else am I missing?
So it's Scalar, Spacelift, Terraform Cloud, and us are the four tacos specifically.
How do you think that, or how would you say that M0 compares to Spacelift and Scalar?
Sure, and one of our distinguishing things is UI UX. We are heavily focused on the user experience. We want everything to be as easy as possible. That's one thing with Scalar. Scalar is very extensible. Their UI and UX is not great, but the people that like Scalar don't really care about that. The same can kind of be said for Spacelift, and we end up going against Spacelift more often than not. And with that, we kind of have two different methodologies and kind of the way that we go about. Even though we solve the same problems and a lot of the things we do the same, their UI is much different. The way that they operate is a little bit different. We like to make sure that we're not going to be prescriptive. We're not going to tell you that you need a mono or a multi-repository strategy. We're not going to tell you that you need to do your modules in a certain way. We're not going to say what your workflow looks like. We like to be able to be as easy as somebody would want us to be, or as complex as they need us to be, with our extensibility and everything like that.
So you would say that Spacelift is more prescriptive, whereas M0 strives to be, let's say, more agnostic to the different styles of...
To a degree, and it's also just kind of, the nomenclature, the way things are set up and everything like that. Like, all of our stuff is based off of the dry methodology, or don't repeat yourself. So, like, all of our variables, we want to make sure that those are scoped in a bunch of different locations so that if you need global, you can have it. If you need specific variables for that one deployment, you can do that. With our template structures, we make sure that you can set up those templates so that they can be reused over and over and over again. That's a big thing with like Terraform Cloud. It's really difficult to duplicate a workspace. So if, say, you want to use the same Terraform code across production and staging and development, copying that workspace is difficult. Now, you can script it with the API and make all of those variables copy and stuff like that, but we're really, really focused on making you, if you're going to use something multiple times, we only want you to set it up one time and then use it everywhere.
Can you go into that a little bit more? You mentioned templates. There's certain sort of let's say structures within M0 that may not be so obvious to the classic sort of DevOps engineer out there.
Absolutely. So we technically have 4 levels of constructs, so to speak. We have the overall organization. That's just, most customers have one. Some service providers might split that between customers, but for the most part, there's just one organization. Within the organization, there's projects. Now, those projects can be they can organize any way you want. It's kind of a folder, so to speak. So you could have your dev project, or you could have your prod project. We have some customers that are like, this is my AWS project, this is my Azure project, and that way you can kind of organize that any way you see fit. There's also templates, and with those templates, essentially that's just where you point us at your repository, wherever those TF files or your other infrastructure as code files are. Mm-hmm. So if you've got like a service, great, point us at the service. If you have a full application, great, point us at that. Whichever bit you need to organize that by, you point us there, and then the smallest construct we have is the environments, and that's the actual deployments. So the way that I like to say is that essentially if there's a Terraform state file for it, that's an environment.
Gotcha, okay. So for example, if there's a folder US West 1, within that would be within the US West 1 folder, you'd expect to find a stateful deployment that would fit into the environment structure.
Exactly right. And like I mentioned, how we don't care what your repository structure is, we'll fit into that. So if you're doing a mono repository and you have all of your different folders for like US East 1, database, and then you have your module, then that would be a template, and that would also be an environment for us. You would create the template off of that module that would then deploy that environment.
Gotcha. Okay, so in the, let's say, there was that great talk by a HashiCorp representative. She was walking us through the different sort of where a team is, along their Terraform lifecycle. I think the end goal was sort of Terra services, where you have, you're unbundling your modules into sort of a modules folder, and then outside of that is where your stateful deployments happen. So the modules would fit into the template structure.
Yeah, so we actually have a couple of different ways you can do that. If you just have a mono repository and you want to create templates off of all those folders, you can do that. Also, we do have a private module registry, so if you want to actually take those modules and load them up, you can do that as well. So that kind of fits into the overall structure of, we're not going to tell you how to do your business, we're just going to help you do it your way.
Right, cool. I was a big TerraGrunt, and still am actually a big TerraGrunt fan. My last company, so the company before last, I actually pushed TerraGrunt, and we were using TerraGrunt. We loved TerraGrunt. It just made it so easy to dry up our code, and also with the latest features they've been pushing, you can dry out almost everything, so there's not a single line of repetition. Now, with companies that can't make that switch, or they're too invested in the existing ecosystem, their Terraform repo just is thousands of deployments long. How would you suggest that a company like that perhaps adopts N0, but also gets their first steps in drying out all that code, because it becomes so difficult to maintain, actually.
Right. And that's one of those things where, again, we're not going to tell you how to do your job. We have a lot of customers that like the idea of TerraGrunt, and in all fairness, TerraGrunt was created quite some time ago to solve a very specific problem that Terraform had, which a lot of the problems that TerraGrunt solves now can be solved natively in Terraform. So there's some customers that think they need Terraform or TerraGrunt, and you don't really need to move. But it's one of those things where if you want to dry out your code and you want to do that, we can help you with that by simply importing all of the existing information. You've got all of your deployments that are out there. We can help you pull those workspaces in, run those, and then essentially you just start creating new directories, new templates and stuff like that with a more dry version, at which point you can then go and redeploy in there with the new code, injecting those variables, instead of having that non-dry code with all of those hard-coded variables. It's a multi-step process, and it can be a pain, but because of the fact that we don't care if it's dry or not dry or what have you, go ahead and bring in what you've got, and then go through, and that'll allow you to slowly start working that code out, breaking that down and drying it out.
Cool. Are there any new features coming up on Env0 that perhaps you're sharing here at KubeCon today, or any cool new things we can let the audience know about?
Absolutely. Yeah. So as of this week, we've announced the release of native Kubernetes support. So it's just yet another framework that we're going to be working with. So you've got your Terraforms, your TerraGrunts, your Pulumis, etc. We will now be working directly with Kubernetes deployments. So you go ahead and feed us whatever you want for the kubectl. We'll run that natively and push that out. The good thing with this is that we're now able to start telling the complete story. So with Kubernetes, you want to take your Terraform or your Pulumi, build that cluster up, and as soon as that deployment's done, trigger the workflow to then run the deployments for all of those pods, all those services, and everything that you need to using kubectl. So we can now tell the end-to-end story of instantiating that cluster and then giving it something to do.
Right, exactly. I mean, HashiCorp, of course, has published a Kubernetes provider, but unfortunately, it's never quite worked for me, especially in complex. You're not a fan? No, neither am I.
It's not great, and I've called it a dumpster fire a few times, and I may feel bad, but it's just not good. It's really unfortunate.
It is really unfortunate. Their Helm provider is a lot better. So if you just have Helm charts to deploy, it's great. But if you're doing things like customize, or you're just deploying plain Kubernetes manifests, I mean, almost inevitably, I dip my toes into it. And I walk away right away.
Not today. Yeah. Just do it the hard way. It's fine.
Exactly. So with Env0's new feature, it really plugs in that lifecycle gap, where you can say, here I'm going to deploy all of this infrastructure with Terraform, and when this cluster goes up, I want to be sure that my Argo CD operator is running, etc. Right?
You can do all of that natively from the platform. So that way you're not having to go off and just start using the CLI to work with it, or you don't have to go to another platform. I really hate the single pane of glass thing. It bothers me, but this really helps us tell that end-to-end story for somebody who's going to be deploying and managing a Kubernetes cluster.
Yeah. So what sort of Kubernetes deployment types does it support? Any sort of manifest that you can think of? Does it support customize, for example?
Anything you're going to be able to do in the kubectl, we're going to be able to support.
It's amazing. So if one of our viewers wants to get started with Env0 today, I know there's a free tier that they can just sort of get their hands wet. What would you recommend? Where should they go? What's a good sort of first step for?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the website is env0.com. We've got that full free tier. You can find it in the big green button in the top right. We've got tons of documentation if you want to go and check out the YouTube channel as well. I've got a lot of information out there, including a From Zero to Deploy administration guide of really quick videos to help you get started, get going, and be off to the races quickly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Tim. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Cool. Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
So this was Tim Davis, developer advocate at Env0. That's ENV, like an environment, the first three letters of environment, 0. So you can get started today. Go on env0.com and get started on the free trial program. I've used Env0 myself, also just as a hobbyist, and it's really patched a lot of the sort of the painful parts of Terraform, I would say. I've been working with Terraform for 3 years now, and every time there's always a part of Terraform when you're using it where you're like, well, I love that it's free. I love that I can just get going, but when you're really working on a larger team, you really want some of these features like for example, cost estimation. Or if you're working with Kubernetes, now you can spin up your cluster and then immediately deploy into that. You can populate that cluster right away using M0's new feature. So I'm really excited to try it out myself, actually, perhaps on my home lab at home where I'm running my own OpenShift cluster. So let's, we'll talk about that a little bit more later today. But for now, I can see that we've got Ben from InfluxDB. Hi, Ben. Hey.
How's it going?
Good.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. This is Benjamin Corbett from InfluxDB. Can you kind of introduce yourself and what you do at InfluxDB?
Yeah, of course. So my name's Benjamin Corbett. I'm a solutions engineer here at InfluxDB. So really kind of one foot in the engineering team, one foot in the sales team. I work with our customers as they go through the process of their kind of like time series application discovery. So yeah, it's great. It's the reason I chose it is because I love working face-to-face with customers, but it's also super hands-on, right? So I used to be a developer specifically in IoT, and like I didn't want to give up my, my appetite for coding was always still there. So it kind of combines the best of both worlds there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was an SRE before I became a developer advocate, and I just realized, like, as an SRE, as much as I enjoyed it, I really wanted more face time with my customers and just because I love meeting new people. That's also what I'm here doing today, and talking about technology that we're passionate about.
Yeah,
so can you kind of introduce for those of you out there who are completely unaware of what time series is or what a time series database is, I would start maybe with those DevOps engineers out there who are working with something like Prometheus, for example.
Yeah,
right. That could be an example of time series data that's coming in. But could you maybe start from the ground up and kind of explain?
Absolutely, yeah. So as a solutions engineer, I'm asked what is time series and why time series databases, right, all the time. So basically it means any data that has a timestamp, right? So traditional databases are really broad. They're almost like a Swiss Army knife to kind of handle any workload. So if you think about SQL, you can use any of the columns and for indexing, but as soon as you start to pull out time as the priority in the way that you index and want to query, it becomes much more performant to use a natively built, purpose-built time series database, right? So what it allows us to do is once you scale those workloads, it just enables you to have much higher write and read performances across those. So time series data, timestamps, think transactions, think metrics, think sensor data, all of this stuff. So anything coming from a particular data source, which measures something over time, is considered time series data. But it's interesting, like I was an IoT developer, so I joined to work with sensors, and then I just discovered, oh, that's why I go to Influx, and it caters for a whole breadth of use cases, right? So DevOps engineers, you mentioned, so we do a lot of work with infrastructure monitoring. So we have loads of tools which make it super easy for you to be able to pull data out of Kubernetes clusters, Prometheus itself, application monitoring, and then IoT, and as well as lots of other use cases.
Wow. So a typical database like something like Postgres or MySQL, you could do time series. You could go ahead and put time series data in there, and I guess companies do that out there.
So I'm gonna come clean now as well because I was just talking to your colleague, and I feel like the reason that I joined Influx is because as an IoT developer, I got burnt. I was building real-time solutions, not using a purpose-built database, right? So what you find is that they work for proof of concepts and they work for a couple of sensors worth of data, but as soon as you start to scale that out, you start to feel the inefficiencies around processing, but also cost if you're running it in the cloud as well, right? So
is that what you were doing? You were running your Postgres database in the cloud?
I was doing a condition monitoring project using a relational database for about a week until I realized that it was absolutely not the way to go. As soon as you start using something which is actually tailored for that specific workload, it's just you get burnt, and that's why you move on and you discover these new products. So that's the reason I joined Influx as well.
Wow. What would you say are your competitors in this space, if they're?
To be honest, I say this is what we say in the company as well, because we're an open source first company, and what we wanted to do initially by being open source is kind of, get our name out there and have a fantastic developer experience and kind of, basically become a skill that everyone wanted to take onto their next role, right? And then we thought, how do we become a business? So let's make a cloud offering, let's make a SaaS solution. So as a solutions engineer, I'm working with customers who want to develop projects. Really, our biggest competitor is ourselves, right? Because a lot of the time they just stay on using open source. So what I try and work with customers is say open source is, our flagship product. It's super, super capable, and we have a fully managed version as well. So that's kind of at the moment like where we see a lot of our customers going. But yeah, time series databases, there's a lot of them out there, right? So you got, I think, AWS time series.
Okay.
Yeah, that's out there at the moment. You've obviously got Prometheus. You've got Timescale as well. But one of the things we don't really like to get into like competition or competitive marketing. What we want to do is just create a great product and have our customers feel that experience. But one thing that I've experienced as well, which I've met so many people here at the conference today, and most people have at least heard of us, and most people have used us, which is great. And they come over and we say, Influx just has an incredible developer experience, right? So it's one thing our CTO and founder, Paul Dix, is really passionate about. So he kind of created it when he was working on Wall Street, right? And he realized he was having to develop these applications in order to start to do work, which were all around like tracking market data, financial data. So he thought, this is a terrible developer experience. These are the guys we need to keep happy. These are what we're building our product for, which is why we have like a whole suite of open source products, which make it really easy for you to use Influx, and you don't necessarily have to be a developer to use it too, right? So work with customers every day that say, you've changed creating a project in 2 months down to 2 weeks.
Wow.
So yeah, I'm regularly running like 1 week or even a couple of days proof of concepts for people. So
Can you go into that portfolio of open source products a little bit more and sort of explain how they can leverage existing developers, can speed up their flows?
Yeah, for sure. So InfluxDB, version 2 at the moment is a single binary. So what that has is it has our UI tool, which was previously in version 1 called Chronograph. So now it's in the single binary out of the box. And also we have our alerting product in there as well, which was previously called Capacitor. Now, yeah, all in the single binary, which is great. But the second one as well, which is extremely powerful, lots of people don't even use it for Influx as well, is Telegraph. So that's our open source data collection agent, right? Super lightweight, runs in memory, deploy it wherever you want. It's plugin driven, right? So the idea is we're giving you a way to get data into or move data to where you want to move it without writing any code. So I work with IoT customers. The first thing I say is, let me see your ingestion architecture. Is it MQTT? Is it OPC UA? Here's the set of plugins that you need to have a look at. And what this does is allow you to collect, pass, and then write the data to a variety of sources, not just Influx. So that's an example of us, creating another product which makes the developer experience really enhanced.
So how would a developer use this tool to Telegraph to pull in data, and then where would they sort of shuttle it off to typically if they're going to?
So as I said, Telegraph it's an open source collection agent, run wherever you want. It has a configuration file, right? So you pick your plugin. It gives you a small set of lines to write, and you just write in like the configuration of the data source. So if it's MQTT, you write your topics in, your credentials, and then what you do is run the agent, which has the correct configuration file on it. The data sources that you write to, obviously it works really well with InfluxDB. So again, you just pop in your URL, your credentials, and it will start writing data over. Yeah.
Hey, I can. And tell me if I'm wrong, but my sort of light bulb goes off because I'm thinking of my own home lab, one of my next plans for the home is to make everything smart, right? I want to know exactly how much electricity every little piece of technology is using.
I know you were at our stand before, but you should come over and see the demo that we've got set up. So we actually have a houseplant monitor set up at the moment, which is...
I love it, and I love we're actually giving away baby houseplants on stream today, so this is perfect.
You need to come and bring it over, because I can tell you exactly the health of that houseplant. So we've got 3 sensors hooked up, just using an Arduino, right? So soil moisture, temperature and humidity, and also light, and soil temperature. So what we can do is, I've just got a Python client which is running using our SDKs as well, which is another example of like how we're making it really easy for developers, right? So that demo, I just wanted to show how easy it is to get data into Influx. And on the screen behind us, we've got like, I'm signed into my cloud account, and what we can do is just, drop the soil moisture into a glass of water and watch it rise and things like that. So I spoke to so many guys who come over and say, Arduino, I got one of those at home. Yeah. And I just kind of talk them through. It's quite nice because you see people and their pet projects, they're getting quite inspired, which is great.
Yeah. So they're sensors that you're demoing now, they're sensors that are built on the Arduino platform?
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. As soon as you get you get your Arduino, you can buy the sensors from line. You just download the packages. Yeah. So and then you can configure them in the Arduino development environment. And then I just have a Python client which is collecting from that. So yeah, we work with customers all the time that have things like Raspberry Pis that they're using to collect data. So yeah, I'm obviously focusing on IoT there a little bit because that's kind of my background. But yeah, that's kind of what people use it for.
That's really amazing. So we're going to be giving some baby houseplants away on the next stream, the next interview, and then the interview following that with our founder Jón Eðvald. But if you're thinking of coming down to KubeCon, you're watching from home now, come down. And maybe you've won 6 new baby houseplants, and you want to know, how do I monitor them? Yeah. You should definitely go down to the InfluxDB booth.
We'll have a blog online and a GitHub repo that you can download, so you can set that up in a few clicks.
That's so cool. I'm going to be using it myself with my houseplants at home. That's so cool. What other sort of use cases can you share? Like, let's say, from small to big, what's sort of your biggest industrial application that you've seen?
Yeah, so we work with like some aerospace clients, right? So time series database, as I said before, really specialize in like high write and read performances. So one use case I find really, really cool is people that have particularly spiky workloads, right? So we work with aerospace companies which during like launches and takeoffs, they need to pull out vibrations down to the nanoseconds and pump it into InfluxDB. And then when it's not during launch, they have no workload, right? So those are some of the use cases that I've seen specifically in IoT, which are towards the bigger end. And then, yeah, we also, we can monitor like networks, infrastructure for like streaming services as well. So obviously when you get these huge streaming platforms which have an event, like they have an extremely high workload over a very short space of time. So either you need an elastically scalable service, which can support that, or a highly available clustered solution, because their business depends on the uptime of this monitoring solution. So yeah, those are kind of some of the like really intense workloads that I've experienced.
You could say that InfluxDB is in some way literally powering rocket launches to space.
I think we need to put that on a T-shirt.
Yeah,
that would be great, for sure.
Sure. Yeah. Maybe this is the first time you've heard it here. What's Does InfluxDB also run on Kubernetes, for example, since we have a lot of Kubernetes attendees?
Yeah, for sure. So two kind of relevant, Kubernetes things that I'll bring up as well is that, so firstly, you can use it to monitor Kubernetes. Using Telegraph, as I mentioned before, you can integrate with a kubelet directly or also scrape from Prometheus. It plays really nicely with both of those, and obviously then you get access to all of the value adds of Influx itself, including alerts. But yes, you can also, if you already have a monitoring solution, but you're looking to service another workload using Influx, you can deploy on Kubernetes too, right? So not only do we have like Docker images for the single node OSS, our open source version, but if you have our clustered solution, we have Helm charts which allow you to deploy that as well. That we see a lot of customers doing that.
Are the Helm charts priced, or is that also?
So our open source obviously completely free. That's single node, right? So what that does, it's extraordinarily powerful. And what we find is when customers move towards, they need horizontal scalability or high availability, they have to move towards one of our clustered solutions. Yeah. We call it InfluxDB Enterprise. Okay. And what this does is it has data replication across nodes, which is kind of buffered and guaranteed. So, if one node goes down and the first node is taking on the whole workload, when the second node comes back up, the data is synced across. So this solution can be deployed on InfluxDB Enterprise. And then obviously the third product that we have now is our SaaS solution, right? So this is the fully managed multi-tenant cloud version of our product, which gives you elastic scalability rather than just horizontal scalability. So
if you don't have a platform team, or perhaps you're a smaller startup, you'd want to use the cloud offering.
Which is great, because it's so it's got free tier as well. It works really well for pet projects because if you just have a couple of sensors in your home,
For example, houseplants.
houseplants, you can just spin up a free instance and you can pump that data into your free InfluxDB cloud. This is obviously where we have daily releases where the latest and greatest features are going, and then also you can sign up to have usage-based billing, right? So if your workload is scaling and you're not really sure how it's going to be forecast over the next year, you can just put a credit card on there and you pay for what you use. We bill by data in, data out, queries, and storage. So it's 4 really simple pricing vectors. Yeah. And then obviously if you have a very heavy workload, there's annual contracts that we can run as well, which have usage multipliers and things like that for you. Yeah.
You mentioned your CEO was obsessed with the developer experience, right?
Yeah.
And I can see that that also extends to even your developers working on InfluxDB. I know that you're a customer of Garden's,
yeah.
And so you actually use Garden inside the inner loop. To build faster and deploy faster, yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, it's kind of how I heard about InfluxDB because I'd used it as an IoT developer.
Yeah.
But one of the things that sealed the deal was talking to my friends who are developers and how fantastic the developer experience was and community, and obviously their processes, right? So it's because we were an open source product. It's basically a company of developers to start off with, right? And we actually had our annual event. We called it Join a few weeks ago in Las Vegas. Yeah. And it was still fantastic to see that the vast majority of the company are developers. So, we're a product-led company and we want to make something super awesome. Yeah. And that continues to be the case. Yeah.
So this was your first annual event just for InfluxDB enthusiasts?
Yeah, I think since the last 2 years, it was an internal company event. So yeah, just imagine that. People who have joined over the last 2 years, everyone's been super siloed, isolated, remote working, and then all of a sudden we all come together in Las Vegas. And you realize everyone's a completely different height than what you expected because you've only seen them on Zoom calls. But no, it was great. It was such a good opportunity to get together with the team and learn more about our new features and things like that. And everyone kind of gets aligned on the product roadmap, so it's cool.
How big is the company actually?
I think it's about 250 there or thereabouts at the moment. Mm-hmm. So yeah, as I said, now we've got our cloud offering at the moment. We're expanding quite a lot. So I'm part of the new and emerging European team. So obviously San Francisco-based company at the moment, kind of building out these different teams in different regions as Influx continues to grow and the use cases continue to pop up. So it's my biggest problem at the moment is just time in the day, which is why we have so many, we're hiring a lot at the moment.
Yeah, so InfluxDB is hiring, Garden is also hiring. I can only give a tip out there for those CEOs or CTOs out there or hiring managers. Yeah. If you have a big developer team, make sure that your developers talk to the developers in your company. Ask them, where is the friction? Yeah. Where are you feeling the hurt? Right? How much time are you actually spending developing versus waiting for something to deploy, waiting for some test to come back? Really make sure that your developer experience is as best as it can be.
And one of the things I've noticed as well, even coming to KubeCon, is there's so many businesses that are solving so many problems that I was aware of, but also problems that I never considered problems. So yeah, get yourself down to a conference like this, and you'll find there is a business out there for every headache that you can use to solve one of your problems. So yeah.
Absolutely. I have a whole notebook full of companies that I want to speak to today. So thank you so much, Benjamin, for this. It was such a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah,
and I'm going to be using InfluxDB myself to monitor my smart plants, my house plants.
Come by, I'll show you how it works.
Absolutely, I will do that. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye. So that was our interview with Benjamin. Benjamin is a senior engineer at solutions engineer at InfluxDB. It's great to have him on, and also just to learn about time series databases. I've only ever really worked with time series for metrics and monitoring of Kubernetes clusters, checking the pod error rates, how many times a pod reboots over a period of time. So I wasn't really familiar with other use cases for time series data, but making your home smart sounds like a great use case. So also for hobbyists out there, If you heard that InfluxDB has a free tier for their managed cloud offering. So if you're interested in and you're thinking about joining us today, come down, get the demo on how you can monitor your new baby houseplants that we'll be giving away today. We'll be giving them away in the next interview. That's going to be with the CEO of Buoyant, who makes Buoyant makes they're the creators of the first service mesh, and the creators of Linkerd, which is a service mesh. Linkerd we talked about a little bit yesterday. We had an interview with Casper Nielsen, who's a CNCF ambassador and the lead platform engineer at Lunar at Neobank. We spoke to him a little bit about the contest that he had with another developer at Lunar, where you had Casper was trying to get a service mesh up as quickly as possible using Linkerd, and then the other engineer was trying to get a service mesh as quickly up and running and functional as possible with Istio. And Casper said yesterday that after 2 days, they were unable to get a fully operational Istio service mesh. So it's a little bit funny to me, and really showcases the strengths of Linkerd. I think that Casper said he was able to go from 0 to fully operational Linkerd service mesh in an hour or 2. So that's going to be really exciting. I know it's my favorite service mesh. When I have to use a service mesh, you don't always have to use a service mesh. And if you're a developer out there, or you're working with Kubernetes clusters and you're wondering when is the right time to go service mesh, well, we'll hear more from William Morgan, the CEO of Buoyant, just in a bit about how you can get started, or when is the right time to actually deploy Linkerd to your Kubernetes cluster. I'm going to take a 1-minute break just to check on the time and our next coming guests, and then I'll be right with you. Maybe we can look up. Maybe you can. We can get a sweep of the booth. Yeah. Let's see. We're rolling? Are we rolling? We're live? We're live? Okay. So welcome back. We just had I would have joined you a little bit earlier, but we just had a little bit of a technical issue, so thanks for bearing with us. In just a few minutes, we will be speaking with the CEO of Buoyant, which makes a fully managed, well, they're the creators of Linkerd, a service mesh that is used in your Kubernetes deployments, often in an enterprise setting. But they also make a fully managed Linkerd if you don't have a platform team to take care of that, or you don't want to deal with the headaches of setting up and maintaining your own service mesh. Totally understandable. I've had to deal with Istio a number of times, and the less said about that experience, the better. So this will also be your first opportunity to win the first 6 of 12 baby houseplants. Those houseplants will be hand selected, hand curated by the garden team here, and each 6 will be different. So if you're interested in that giveaway, we're going to be doing that at the end of William's interview, which is coming up in just a few minutes. And all you have to do is listen for the 2 words that I say after "until then." So I'm going to say "until then" and then 2 words. If you can DM the garden_IO That's garden_io Twitter account with those 2 words that you hear after until then. You'll be entered into the raffle to win 6 baby houseplants. So do that for this upcoming interview, and then also be on the watch out for the second giveaway, which is going to be the interview immediately after Williams, which will be with our CEO, Jón Eðvald. He's Icelandic, so I always butcher his last name. I'll ask Jón actually how you correctly pronounce his last name in Icelandic in that interview. So we're going to be on the lookout for William in just a few minutes, and I'm going to review my topic cards here and make sure that I'm prepared for the interview. What is the time? Okay, so we have 2 minutes left until William Morgan's interview, the CEO of Buoyant, creators of the Linkerd service mesh, and also a managed Linkerd solution. I will be right back, folks. Go? Okay, cool. Can we, Luca, can we bring the camera a little bit more this way? I'm just a little bit worried about buzzing the other booths. So we had another slight technical issue. Thanks for your patience. William is just grabbing a glass of water, and then he's going to be right here with us. This is also going to be your opportunity to win the first 6 baby houseplants of 12, and the other 6 will be given away during our own CEO's interview happening right after Williams. So stick around for that. I can see Williams coming now. We're going to introduce him and get to the interview. Great. Welcome, William.
Hello.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah.
Hello. Could you introduce? Let's come back a little bit. Come back a little bit. Step back a little bit. Yeah. There we go. Can you introduce yourself and and maybe talk a little bit about what your day-to-day is like at Buoyant Cloud.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, so my name is William Morgan. I'm one of the creators of Linkerd, which is an open source service mesh, and I'm also the CEO of a company called Buoyant, which helps organizations around the world adopt Linkerd as part of their Kubernetes infrastructure. So, what is my day-to-day like? Well, Buoyant is remote first, so physically I'm, at home in a home office, staring at a computer screen for hours on end. Extremely unhealthy. I would not recommend this lifestyle to anyone. A lot of emails, a lot of chatting with folks on Slack. Our Linkerd community, is primarily centered on a Slack channel, slack.linkerd.io. You can go and sign up, and so a lot of that is just interacting with those folks, making sure everyone is able to solve their issues, and then kind of all the other administrative stuff that comes with running a company.
So you actually come from a technical background. You were one of the original architects of Linkerd. Is that fair?
That would be overstating it. Twitter had, this was a while ago, but Twitter had just started to go through this transformation from a monolithic Ruby on Rails architecture to what we would now call a cloud-native architecture. Microservices, orchestration, containerization, sort of. Very different from what we do today with Kubernetes and stuff, but kind of operationally very similar. And so the idea for Linkerd early on was we wanted to take the same kind of model that worked really well at Twitter, turn that into something that the rest of the world could use. And when we started working on Linkerd, we actually started with a bunch of the open source code from Twitter. We ended up having to rewrite it for computer reasons, which I'm happy to go into if you want to. But the idea fundamentally was the same, and kind of it happened at a time when Kubernetes was taking off and Docker was taking off, and everything just kind of started making sense.
Is it true that Linkerd is actually the first service mesh? Because I think when people first sort of think of service mesh, they think of Istio, the complex hydra of the Kubernetes dungeon.
Yeah, I love that description. So yes, Linkerd was the very first service mesh. It was a project that coined the term, and we actually had to invent that term because we had a hard time describing what Linkerd did. At its core, there's a proxy, and that proxy was very different from the proxies that people were used to using at that point. This was 2015, 2016. People were used to large proxies sitting at the ingress layer or to a central bank of proxies, and we were saying something crazy, which was like, hey, take these tiny little proxies and distribute them everywhere. And what do they do? Well, we just had such a hard time describing it, so we had to invent what was basically a meaningless term, service mesh, and say, well, Linkerd is a service mesh, and then people would say, oh, okay, what is a service mesh? And then you'd explain it to them. Yeah. Later, of course, Istio co-opted that term and poured a lot of marketing dollars into it, and the term became very, very popular. And I kind of regret coining it now because it's like such a buzz term.
Yeah.
That's my claim to fame, maybe.
Can you explain for those of us out there, perhaps we are just hobbyists of Kubernetes clusters, or perhaps we're working on very sort of small scale startups that haven't seen a reason to adopt a service mesh. To those people who may be unfamiliar with the service mesh, at least how Linkerd defines it, how what would you explain it as?
Yeah, so it is a layer of infrastructure that sits kind of in between what Kubernetes provides and what the application provides. And what it does is it gives you a set of tools around observability and around reliability and around security that Kubernetes doesn't give you, not because Kubernetes is bad, but because Kubernetes has a strongly delineated boundary in what it does and does not do. Mm-hmm. So for example, Kubernetes will set up layer 4 networking for you, so you can establish a TCP connection between pods, okay? And then Linkerd will provide mutual TLS. So we'll deal with the certificate infrastructure, and we'll encrypt the connections, and and give you integrity and confidentiality and authenticity and kind of all the values of TLS. And so the way Linkerd works, is like the weird thing where basically we just add a whole lot of these tiny little proxies everywhere next to your application, and those proxies intercept the communication to and from the microservices and add features on top of that. And 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, the thought of deploying 10,000 proxies to power some layer of your infrastructure was crazy. But the magic of Kubernetes is we can actually do that in a way that is manageable and that has operational semantics that are not totally crazy. So what Linkerd gives you, is this set of features. It does it in this kind of interesting way that's made possible by Kubernetes, and it fits very nicely into the Kubernetes ecosystem. I think the word service mesh now kind of has a bad reputation. It's a reputation for complexity, in part because of certain other projects. But for Linkerd at least, our approach has been we have to make this simple. Above all, we have to make this simple. So we have to make it smell like Kubernetes and feel like Kubernetes, and operationally not give you a lot of new stuff you have to learn. And then on the implementation side, all those proxies have to be the lightest, smallest, fastest proxies that we can make. And that's what sets Linkerd apart. Linkerd is a very unique project in the service mesh space. There's a lot of different service meshes, but we're the only one that has a very specifically designed proxy that's not general purpose. It's just for the sidecar service mesh use case. We want to make it an implementation detail. It's fun to talk about from the technical standpoint because there's all sorts of cool technology that goes in there, but from the user's perspective, that has got to be an implementation detail. It can't be a big operational burden to you. So that's kind of the unique thing that we do in Linkerd land to make it so fast and small and light.
Why would an engineer want actually encrypted communication between pods?
I mean, I don't know. I don't think an engineer would. Well, other than kind of security practice, right? So often that's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek answer.
Yeah.
Of course, security is important, and how much you are personally responsible for the security of your organization kind of depends on your role. But I'll say the number one driver of Linkerd adoption today is mutual TLS, because what happens is people have realized, hey, as we're moving to the cloud especially, these networks are not our networks anymore. We don't own them. These wires are operated by someone else and some other company, and not only that, they're doing all this multi-tenant stuff on there. Like, you just lose a lot of the control that you used to have when you were doing this in the good old days of like running your own data center. So in that world, suddenly we have to start kind of making the boundaries, or making the underlying infrastructure a lot more secure, and we can do that through software. We can't do that through hardware anymore, right? It's shared hardware, but we can do that through software. So things like mutual TLS suddenly become very appealing, because not only do you get encryption, but you also get what I would say is more important than encryption, which is you get identity. And you get identity provided securely, because that, if you and I are establishing a secure connection, that's great, but if I don't have a guarantee that you are actually who you say you are,
right,
we don't actually have security. So that notion of identity and workload identity.
I want to know that you're William,
and
I want to know that I'm Tao when we're speaking.
That's right. You have to know that I'm me and you're you. Otherwise, you don't actually have security. And that's what mutual TLS gives you, and it gives you in this very nice way that's attached to the workload identity and not the network identity. And there's all sorts of stuff we can talk about with zero trust and what does that mean. But that's the number one driver for Linkerd today, is the ability to easily add mutual TLS to your cluster.
When would be a good time for, let's say a company on various sort of life cycles, or various stages of their growth, right? So, this could be a startup of 5 engineers. Perhaps they're on Kubernetes, they're native, but they're not really sure if they should be bringing service mesh on. When's a good time for a company to really start looking at that?
You should immediately bring it on. You should pay us for our extremely expensive enterprise version. No, I'm kidding. We don't actually have an enterprise version. So I think that decision is a sensitive one, and it always has to be made in the context of what else is happening at the organization and what are your goals. But I'll say from Linkerd's perspective, I think we have the lightest, simplest, fastest possible implementation of the service mesh. And so I think the barrier to getting started is actually quite low. It's lower than people think it is. So I would say the advantage of something being open source is that you can get your hands dirty very easily. There's very few barriers to entry. I would try it. You can get it installed in a few minutes. You can enable mutual TLS in 0 seconds after that, because we actually turn it on by default. And get your hands dirty and try it.
So speaking of, I just want to relate a story. I interviewed Casper Nissen, who's a CNCF ambassador yesterday and works for an absolutely incredible company, Neobank Lunar. Their tech stack is, to all you engineers out there who are wondering, you might be thinking you have the sickest tech stack out there. I guarantee you Lunar's doing some incredible stuff that'll make you weep in joy. But Casper was relating a story actually of he had a contest with one of the other engineers at Lunar, and it was like, okay, let's try out this service mesh thing, right? You deploy Istio, and I deploy Linkerd, and we'll see how fast it'll take us to get going. Casper, he says he had Linkerd up and running, fully operational in an hour. Okay, the other engineer, after 2 days, was forced to stop because they both agreed they were just wasting too many developer hours on this contest. So I just thought that was kind of funny. If you're thinking that service meshes are these really like complex things, and to some extent they are, it's complex technology, but I mean, getting started does not have to be that painful for most.
Yeah, that's right. And if you look at, we've written out our design philosophy, and I've spoken a lot about this because, again, this is what makes Linkerd so unique. We focus very heavily on this notion of operational simplicity, which is, and the install experience is great, but you're only doing that once, right? The thing that we really care about is when it's 3 in the morning and you're like awake in bed, are you worrying about Linkerd, right? Are you worrying about that thing doing something crazy or not, right? And the answer should be not, right? And so operational simplicity means that Linkerd needs to be observable, so you need to be able to see every part of it. It means it has to be understandable, so you need to know what those parts are, and they need to make sense. And then it has to be predictable, so you need to be able to have a mental model of what Linkerd is doing. And if you have those 3 things, then you have an operationally simple system. The technology underneath might still be complex, and when we talk about the cool Rust proxy tech that powers the Linkerd proxy, it does get complex, but that complexity is not exposed to the operator, and that's our primary user. And I think we have an obligation to make this something that you as an adopter don't have to live in fear of. Sometimes you have to use a service mesh because there's a requirement to have MPLS. If that's the case, I don't want you feeling like you've just signed up for a horrible next couple years. Yeah. I want you feeling good about the decision.
Yeah. So apart from operational simplicity, what are some other reasons why a developer or perhaps a platform engineer, I should say, an SRE, would want to adopt Linkerd over some of the other service meshes that are out there? What are sort of the star halo features?
Yeah, well, simplicity is a big one because to me that's the human aspect of this, and that's more important than anything else, at least in my mind. But we also focus very heavily on performance and on resource consumption. So like I said, the way that the service mesh works is we add a sidecar proxy next to every pod in your network. And it's actually a beautiful model. It's a really, really nice model that is enabled. I think this is one of the gifts that Kubernetes gave to the world, is the ability to do this kind of late binding or runtime binding of functionality. Our proxy's written in Rust, your application is written in whatever it is, but we can actually bind these 2 things together at runtime in a way that the application is not even aware of. Right. So the sidecar model is beautiful, but in order to do that, we're deploying tens of thousands of proxies. That only makes sense if those proxies are really, really fast, if they're really, really small, and if they consume a tiny, tiny amount of system resources. So we focus very heavily on those characteristics, and that's part of the reason why Linkerd did not adopt Envoy. Envoy is a great project. It powers most other service meshes, but ultimately Envoy is a complex and large program with a big memory footprint and worse, I would say, a big operational footprint. It's not easy to do that. So we had to spend a lot of time implementing a proxy. It doesn't even have a good name. It's like Linkerd proxy. It's not general purpose, not intended to be used by anyone other than Linkerd. But the payoff, the benefit is really extraordinary.
Can we talk a little bit about the paid offering that I believe you're demoing at the booth just next door to ours today? Why might a team be looking to buy in? What are the sort of feature value adds? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's right. So, we've got Linkerd, the open source project, and then we also, at Buoyant, we're also building a commercial product called Buoyant Cloud. And it's directly in line with our entire philosophy around Linkerd, around operational simplicity. So with Buoyant Cloud, we can actually offer you Linkerd as a service. It's, if I could host Linkerd entirely for you, I would, right? But unfortunately, the data plane, those proxies need to sit on your application. It's the way it works. But we can do the next best thing, which is we can give you the ability to treat it as a real utility. So what happens is you can take an existing open source Linkerd deployment, you can add the Buoyant Cloud agent to it, and you can start, number one, you get incredible health checks and metrics and insight into the behavior of what Linkerd is doing, and is there anything you need to worry about, and you can hook that up to PagerDuty or to email or Slack or whatever that is. And then number two, we'll also take on what SRE teams call toil. We'll take on the tasks of upgrades, of installs, of data plane upgrades, as well as control plane upgrades, of trust anchor rotation, all the things that are part of nurturing, and caring for a live Linkerd deployment. We can actually do that for you. So then you can hand off the operations entirely to Buoyant, and you can treat Linkerd as a utility. And for some customers, that solves everything for them because they don't want to be service mesh experts, and it's not their value add. For others, they're comfortable operating Linkerd themselves, and that's fine. That's totally fine.
Are you only targeting a Buoyant Cloud at very large enterprises, or is it for big and small?
Yeah, I'd say it's for anyone who wants all the value of a service mesh, but does not want to have service mesh experts on staff or have their engineers have to become service mesh experts.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the coolest sort of use cases you've seen of Linkerd out there in the wild? Could be like really big deployments. It could be just really cool applications of Linkerd that you've seen and might want to share with the audience.
Yeah, so one that comes immediately to mind, we have a talk later today here at this very KubeCon.
Hey, please give all the details.
Yeah, from the Xbox Cloud Gaming team about how they use Linkerd in a very large deployment, something like 22,000 pods, to secure the system that delivers cloud-based gaming, to customers around the world. That's a really interesting use case that I would never have predicted. Last KubeCon EU, which was all virtual, the Linkerd team actually keynoted on all the ways that Linkerd have been used to address the global COVID-19 pandemic. So we see use cases all over the world from all sorts of companies and organizations doing crazy, crazy things. We're never able to predict what's going to happen next.
Oh, wow. I'm actually an Xbox Game Pass subscriber, and all of my hardware at home is so dinky. Or I run my own OpenShift cluster in my home lab, but that's not for gaming. So I use these cloud gaming services. It's really cool, kind of knowing that my Xbox cloud gaming experience is powered by Linkerd. Pretty cool. Can you give us a little more details on if you know where that talk is, what time, if somebody's interested in attending? Do you remember?
I would have to look it up. It's today. It's this afternoon.
Okay.
I think it's yeah. If you hold my water, I can look it up.
I just think if you go to the KubeCon website, just search for KubeCon Valencia 2022. There's a whole schedule there. And you should be able to find this. Just search for Xbox, and if you're interested in coming to join that talk, it should be really interesting. 5:25. Great. I'll be able to make that one, so I'll be attending that. I just wanted to sort of say at the last for the last bit of this interview, it's been such a pleasure to have the CEO. William Morgan of Buoyant here, creators of the first service mesh and Linkerd, everybody's favorite service mesh. As you know, this is one of the interviews where we're doing a giveaway for 6 baby houseplants. So I'm going to say until then, seek mercy. Okay, those are your 2 words. Until then, seek mercy. If you're out there, a little bit strange 2 words, but if you're out there and you want to enroll in this raffle, go ahead and DM our garden_io Twitter account, and you can enter to win your very own 6 baby houseplants. Thank you so much for your time, William. This was amazing. Yeah. Great. So in just a few minutes, we're going to be speaking to Jón, actually one of our co-founders here, and speaking to him a little bit more about what you can expect from Garden on a paid offering, from cloud to enterprise. We also offer an on-prem solution, and we'll be getting his thoughts on the developer workflow, how so many developers are struggling today. And how Garden is really able to help them inside their inner loop. That's the loop that developers do their best work in, where they're most creative. So yeah, I'll see you back at your booth, William. Cool. Okay, great. Bye. So coming up, we've got, as you know, we've got we have our very own Jón, who will be speaking about some of these benefits. And then later, I believe we've got Upbound. Yes. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Actually, the next interview is going to be with Daniel, who is Mangum or Mangum. I'm going to have to check with him on the pronunciation of his last name again. Daniel is a I believe it's a senior engineer from Upbound, and he will be speaking a little bit about Crossplane, which I cannot tell you how much of a love affair I have with Crossplane. That's coming up at 1:30 UTC +2. If you're out there and you're waiting, the second giveaway will happen after Daniel's interview, but you don't want to miss this one because if you're a DevOps engineer out there, or you've written a lot of Terraform, or you've written a lot of Pulumi, or you've used any other sort of infrastructure as code tool, there are parts of the existing IAC, and by IAC I mean infrastructure as code. There's parts of that ecosystem out there where because it's stateful and because it's CLI driven, Terraform and Pulumi, you have to be careful of the resources that you deploy actually falling out of declared state. So that can happen many different ways. One of the ways it can happen is just an engineer or someone on the team that has access to your AWS account, or some other cloud like Scaleway. Perhaps one of those engineers, he or she or they knock over the cloud resources that you've declared, and now you have a state problem. And the state problem is you have of course you've declared the state of a resource on one end. But on the other side, something has happened to that deployed resource, and it no longer actually matches how you've declared it to be. This has been a huge frustration for me at previous companies, whether you're using TerraGrunt, whether you're using Terraform, whether you're using Pulumi. It's sort of a fact of life, and something that you need to find ways of working around with. Our very first interview was with Env0, env0.com. If you've bought into that ecosystem, the Terraform ecosystem or the Pulumi ecosystem, and you're prone to having your state go out of drift. Well, Env0 is a great way of at least mitigating some of that damage, because it's actually able to run Terraform plans on a polling basis in the background and let you know through Slack or email, hey, this resource has gone out of configuration drift. So really cool product, and a free tier for those of you out there who want to give it a shot. If you're working with Terraform every day, if you're working with Pulumi every day, definitely take a look at ENV0. That's ENV as in the first three letters of environment. So now we're soon going to be speaking to Daniel Mangum or Mangum of Upbound. He's a knowledgeable engineer of Upbound. He's going to talk to us a little bit about what's so cool about Crossplane and what Crossplane actually does to solve the infrastructure as code pains, like for example drift. Drift sucks. Don't if you've ever had to do state surgery, this is that you're really going to want to hear what Daniel has to say on this interview, because it's my new. I think it's going to take over the entire IAC industry, and we're really going to be able to reap the benefits of auto reconciling infrastructure, so that if you've got your GitOps, if you've got your manifests, that those will always stay as you've declared them in your single source of truth in your Git repository. What time are we at now? Perfect. Come on over, Daniel. Yeah. I have some notes here.
Back to back to back.
Back to back to back.
It's impressive. You couldn't do it.
I'm feeling the pain in like my lower back all the way down.
Yeah, we need to do like one of those balance.
Yes. or like a treadmill, that I can just yeah. So I kind of introed this interview a little bit, kind of got our audience familiar with what's coming up. We actually spoke to ENV0 earlier. They're sort of like a thin layer over Terraform to solve all of the pain points of Terraform that you'll often run into, or Pulumi, any of these sort of I would call them like Generation 1 infrastructure as code tools. And now this is going to be a great opportunity for people who are curious about what does the next generation of infrastructure as code look like. I use Crossplane at home. I use Crossplane at work. We're running a Crossplane cluster using Sivo, who we had an interview with, the CEO of yesterday here at Garden. So this is one of my most exciting interviews that I'm going to be doing in these 2 days here. Daniel, could you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Dan Mangum, as you mentioned. I work for a company called Upbound. We started the Crossplane project about 5 years ago. I've been there for about 3.5 years. Worked on Crossplane quite a bit. Now I lead our internal engineering at Upbound, which is a lot of fun. But yeah, I'm super excited to talk about Crossplane. I know you've had some really impressive guests on the show, so I'm honored to be a part of your lineup.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. I just wanted to relate a personal anecdote to start, which is how we use Crossplane here at Garden. We're actually, we use Terraform. We do use it in production. This has been sort of like the first discovery phase of Upbound's products, Crossplane. But it was really easy for me to build. So you're going to want to build what's called an infrastructure cluster. It's also known as a management cluster. Daniel will probably call it referred to as something else, perhaps. But because Crossplane is using the Kubernetes API, you're able to gain benefits like auto reconciling cluster deployment. So I here at Garden, we actually created a cluster on Sivo using a management cluster on Scaleway. I used the Scaleway CLI to deploy a management cluster on Scaleway, and then I taught the Scaleway cluster how to speak Crossplane, and was able to pass in my credentials for Sivo and have a auto reconciling, auto healing cluster on the other end within a few minutes. It was very impressive. Can you speak about maybe sort of your own experience with Crossplane and what you love so much about it?
Yeah, for sure. So There's, you mentioned a few infrastructure as code tools kind of there at the beginning. We actually don't see ourselves as an infrastructure as code tool anymore. We're really focused on allowing organizations to build internal developer platforms. And kind of the distinction there, because it is a bit nuanced, right? We're still managing infrastructure, of course. But what Crossplane does is it allows you to bring any external API. So frequently we are talking about cloud provider APIs like, Civo cluster or something like that. But it really can be anything. We have examples where folks are sending Slack messages with Crossplane or posting tweets or something like that, right? So there's all kinds of applications. Really, the base level of consumption is saying, like, I want to provision a specific resource type on a specific cloud provider. So a canonical one we use a lot is like an RDS instance on AWS. The kind of next level of consumption that's built into Crossplane is the composition layer. And that's where you say, maybe at Garden, we deploy databases fairly often, right? It's part of our service that we offer. We wanted to find a very simple schema for developers within Garden to be able to, deploy a database on demand without having to go through the normal, opening a ticket with ops and having them do it. So you define your schema, it can be pretty straightforward. Then you'd also define its mapping to one or more granular resources from the cloud provider. So we call those managed resources, so an RDS instance would be an example. Basically any endpoint on the cloud provider. And then you compose those up into that database abstraction, and you could have one or more implementations for that database itself. And then when the developer provisions, they don't have to worry about how it's actually rendered out. And I love giving developers that kind of power. I think that's the reason why I joined Upbound initially and wanted to work on Crossplane, was because there's too much friction in being able to deploy abstractions. And we have to accept abstractions from cloud providers like AWS and GCP. And the services they offer are great, right? Definitely not advocating for not using them. Please do not take this as run everything on-prem. Instead, what we're saying is, if you want to provide some abstractions on top of that, you should be picking what the API looks like.
That's interesting. So we're going to talk about compositions. We can actually speak about them now. Compositions are as you mentioned, that sort of abstractions over existing, let's say, consumed endpoints or API resources. So one sort of example or comparison that I could think of might be like Spotify's Backstage. Is that sort of a fair, because you have, let's say within a company, within a business, you have your developers teams, and they don't want to fight with Kubernetes. They don't want to declare, well, okay, so I need to make sure that I've put the label at these 3 different places, and I've also, developers are not necessarily going to be Kubernetes experts, and they're not going to necessarily want to write all of that boilerplate YAML. Would that be an example? It's sort of vending internally, like resources that you might want Team A, who's consuming a lot of RDS databases within US East 1 with this type of capacity, for example.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an apt comparison, especially because a lot of folks who use Crossplane also actually use Backstage. I kind of like to look at Backstage as kind of creating a UI version of the infrastructure that we're building. So I love that comparison. I think it's a really powerful technology. And yeah, exactly like you're saying, it's a different way of decreasing that friction. And from a consumption perspective, it's easier to be able to provision this simplified database example we talked about. But it's even easier if you have a UI to be able to go in and say, I'm going to abstract away that you're even applying a YAML manifest to a Kubernetes cluster. You're just, clicking around in a console or using GitOps or something like that.
Yeah. So you could actually use Crossplane compositions in concert with Spotify's Backstage, where you're exposing those resources in a UI consumable way. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is, and it really speaks to a broader point as well. Standardization on the Kubernetes API means that we have really strong integration points with a lot of tools. So Backstage is a good example. Also things for GitOps, like almost everyone who uses Crossplane today uses Argo or Flux or some tooling like that. Also things around policy, so Open Policy Agent, Kyverno, all those sorts of tools, because they operate on Kubernetes objects and they do so in a fairly generic way, you can actually take a policy where you might have said, for this deployment, we only allow for setting these resource limits or something like that, and apply that to now a database that runs on AWS and say, we only allow for this size of database, because those are both just Kubernetes objects. They're being represented in the API.
Interesting, interesting. So you could set it with Open Policy Agent on a more, let's say, cloud provider basis, where it's like only these regions can be deployed to, and then all the way down to the RBAC level within the Kubernetes cluster itself. Yeah, that's cool. I saw a really cool blog post, I think this was last month, about where AWS actually featured Crossplane in one of their blog posts. I was kind of stunned, to be honest, like how much progress had been made, because I remember a year ago when I was first talking to the Upbound people, it was actually a funny story. I was enjoying the summer on a leisurely boat ride in Copenhagen with one of your sales. It was Scott Franklin, who lives in Seattle, I think, and we had like it was the most like hedonistic sales interview I've ever had in my life. I'm just like sipping on a mojito on this boat, but it was just amazing to see how far Upbound has come from not being well known to now being featured by AWS with these AWS blueprints. It sounds like that's an official initiative of the AWS teams, is that correct? And can you go into a little more detail as well?
Yeah, for sure. So I won't speak too authoritatively on that because I wasn't involved in that direct effort, but I will say that we partner with a lot of cloud providers because obviously Crossplane is a way for their customers to consume more of their services, right? So it's obviously incentivized for them to be interactive with that process, and a lot of the Crossplane users and Upbound users also have existing relationships with cloud providers. So really what we're trying to do in any of those sorts of situations, speaking more generally to it, is just enable customers of both of ours to be able to have the best experience for developers internally and also take advantage of all those great services that a company like AWS offers, right? We are huge proponents of using their services, and we just want to make that a better experience for folks.
Right. Wow. Cool. Anything that you're demoing, during KubeCon? I know that 1.8.0 just released like during KubeCon. I got that announcement. I think that might be a pre-release, however, and more of a stability-oriented feature release. But is there anything either coming down the pipe that you want to share with the community, or anything, features that you might be demoing more than others, or that you'd like to share with the viewers?
Yeah, so that Crossplane release, and really most of our Crossplane releases lately are not showing huge diffs on big changes that are coming in because we've reached a lot of stability and adoption. So really what we're trying to do now is just make sure that it works for all scenarios for all types of users. So there's a lot of performance tuning, there's a lot of configuration and things like that, just making sure everything is really solid for all of the users. I will say there are a few things that have come out recently that I think are really useful. We have actually standardized our package format, so the Crossplane packages, whether it's providers that are bringing those AWS types or configurations which are allowing you to define your abstractions and package them up, are packaged as OCI images. So that means that you can push them to Docker Hub or whatever registry you like, or Upbound, we have a registry that will generate documentation for them and things like that. And so it's very easy to distribute these packages. What we've done is formalize that specification, so it's essentially a subset of the OCI specification itself, where you're putting YAML into these images, we pull them down and unpack them, and Crossplane applies it on your behalf. So that's something that's been in place for a long time, but through formalizing it, we've created a few different extension mechanisms to continue building out the packages to have more functionality. And we're really excited about that from a Crossplane community perspective and from an Upbound perspective, because there's specific vendors that will likely want to add their own sorts of extensions, right? If you're using Crossplane packages with our platform, we want to add some special stocks in there that really allows you to take advantage of features we may build in a UI layer or something like that. So really excited to see that kind of thing land. And then there's some advancements to composition that's coming all the time, right? Because that's a heavy use case for Crossplane. So continue to harden that. last thing I mentioned, Upbound has a few new products that are rolling out, specifically around that registry experience and building a marketplace for folks to be able to actually build their packages, share them with others. Just like AWS has those blueprints, those are things that can be featured in a marketplace and used by folks and built on and modified, similar to like what you get with packages of code right on GitHub.
What kind of what kind of packages or why would a user be interested in grabbing a package? What sort of thing could they expect? Do you have any examples from the marketplace that exists today where somebody can take advantage of it? And is it offers both paid and free, or is it
Yeah, so the base type of package is a provider, and that's kind of like bringing AWS resources in and controllers and that sort of thing. So most folks understand that. The configuration packages are the other type, and that's where you put your abstractions. With these abstractions, when you package them up, they typically depend on provider packages, because if you're composing AWS resources, you need those to be present in the cluster. So configuration packages allow you to declare dependencies on providers. Crossplane will actually automatically resolve to pull down any dependencies and install them as well, or if they're already present, make sure they're within your versioning constraints and that sort of thing. So there's some mechanical things that are nice. Also, when you're building out a control plane, Crossplane's package manager gives you a number of guarantees over just like applying a bunch of Helm charts for these controllers. The primary one that most folks are interested in is what we call strong ownership. So there's no...
strong ownership?
Yeah, exactly. And that's just saying that there's no ability for multiple controllers to be reconciling these same objects, which guards against having, a malicious provider being installed that will go and delete all your RDS instances. Crossplane will make sure that only one controller has access to it, and that controller is the one that actually installed that type itself. So building out in packages gives you a bunch of those guarantees. It also allows you to build kind of like a hierarchical DAG of packages, which defines your full control plane API. And when you do that, when you have these package relationships, you can reproduce the control plane API in many different clusters. So those management clusters you were talking about at the beginning, a lot of folks have many different management clusters, potentially for different business units or different products and things like that. And in that case where you're using packages, you can easily reproduce all or part of the same control plane API so that developers can program against a consistent interface when they're creating objects.
Oh, interesting. So that could include like an observability stack or other things like that. You could repackage many to one and then ensure that sort of consistency throughout. Interesting. Yeah. Well, we've started speaking a little bit about the paid side of things, or getting into it. Can you sort of make it a little more explicit? What is the USP for going? Crossplane is open source. You're welcome. Users are welcome to start a management cluster using Crossplane completely for free. I don't believe there's any restrictions, at least as far as the open source product is concerned. But when would a user be interested, becoming more interested in? Is it around strong ownership, for example, where the control plane is hosted by Upbound Cloud? Is it Upbound Cloud? Yeah, Upbound Cloud. Or are there other sort of feature sets that a small startup or a large enterprise might be interested in?
Yeah, so we definitely do not take an open core approach to Crossplane at all, and so there's not any features that are kept out of Crossplane and put into our product or anything like that. Instead, what we say is we want to build an ecosystem around Crossplane and Upbound that makes it the best place to actually run your control planes. Now, you mentioned at the beginning, spinning up a Scaleway cluster for your managed control plane, and then deploying your Civo cluster from there and things like that. Most folks refer to that as the bootstrap problem, right? You can't use Crossplane to spin up that first
chicken
cluster.
and egg.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So what Upbound gives you is the ability to use managed control planes, where we run that for you and give you a simple interface. We provide you things like high availability, backup and restore, so you can do disaster recovery and that sort of thing. So those are kind of like the core features of the platform, but it also gives you the ability to do consistent RBAC across these different control planes as well. So we have higher level primitives for things like users and teams and permission groups and things like that, which makes it easy to actually build out a cloud platform on top of these abstractions you've written. And then I alluded to a little bit the marketplace, which we'll have some more info coming on that in the future. But you can basically, as you would on Docker Hub or somewhere like that, you can create repositories and in our case push packages to them. Our marketplace is a little bit interesting. It's different from a normal OCI registry in that we actually, when we receive your image, we obviously store it and host it, right? But we also crack it open, look at the contents, scan it, make sure it's a valid crossplane package so it's guaranteed to install correctly, and also produce automatically generated documentation for all the types that you're going to install. So just pushing a package, if you want to Docker push a crossplane package to xpackage.upbound.io, we'll open that up and you'll get free documentation for all the types that would be installed when
That's
the user
pretty
used
cool.
that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So are paid sort of package offerings on the table perhaps in the future for Marketplace? Is that something that might be offered?
Yeah, I think we're still in the early days of that, but we as Upbound definitely want to make sure that our customers have confidence in the packages that they're installing. So whether those are packages that we build and we certify and we say, this is our opinion about how you should structure your control plane, that's obviously a vector for revenue in that case and attracting customers with the quality, but also our partners, right? Like we mentioned AWS earlier, there's also many other kind of vendors that may not be traditional cloud providers, like maybe Elasticsearch or something like that, or Elastic in that case, that may want to package up their offering and allow folks to deploy it across clouds. That's a great use for a configuration package where you're saying, I'm going to find some interfaces and some implementations, but when you install this package, you decide as my customer whether you want it to go to AWS or GCP or maybe on-prem or in-cluster, right? We'll give you all the different options. So it really becomes a mechanism for packaging products as well for folks to be able to sell. And Upbound and Crossplane act as the common interface for being able to install and run any of these products. Okay, cool.
Well, if a user is interested in getting started with Upbound Cloud, the paid side of things, there's also a free trial available. There's which Garden has actually signed up for. So we'll have to talk to the sales engineers later about that. Or if you're interested in just getting started with the open source part of Upbound's offering in Crossplane, remember it's not open core. Everything is right there in Crossplane available to use. How would you suggest that users get started? I will say that I have had an amazing experience of just going to Upbound's own YouTube channel where Victor Farsik is, I want to say like I have a little bit of a sort of tech crush on Victor because he just makes videos that are so accessible for anybody. And what I did was I actually adapted his video that he does on GitOps. So you'll start with Flux. He'll guide you through Flux with the whole gist to get started. You deploy a cluster using EKS-CTL, and that functions as your management cluster. And then from there, you use Crossplane to create future auto-reconciling clusters. Is that a good starting point for people? Would you recommend? How else would you recommend people get started?
Yeah, I definitely recommend going and installing Crossplane or using that Upbound free trial, which alleviates the need to even install Crossplane. Yeah. And also want to give a shout out to Victor. We are very privileged to have him on our team, and he's a great person to work with, produces great content, so that's a great avenue as well. Last thing I'll mention is slack.crossplane.io. If you go there, we have a very thriving community, and we are always excited to welcome new folks, help them along their journey, learn about how they're using Crossplane, how we can make Crossplane better. So definitely encourage folks to get in there. Feel free to ask questions, and there'll be someone there to help you.
Cool, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Daniel. Can you help me how to pronounce your last name, actually?
Yeah, my last name is Mangum. Or Mangum, if that's easier, because then you can just say two words I likely know. Okay. If you're an English speaker.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Cool. Thank you so much, Daniel Mangum of Upbound here today. It was a great interview. I really appreciated it, and I'm sure our audience did as well. Thank you. So that was Daniel. I am so passionate about Upbound's products. So passionate about Crossplane, which is their fully OSS. There's no open core about it. It makes me so happy to see more and more people adopting interesting use cases of the Kubernetes API, because I've heard it said to me once before that the Kubernetes API at its core is actually just a system. It's a message passing system that can be used for describing the world. Anything that you could think of, if you can think of a way that you would like to declare intent and have that manifest in the world, the Kubernetes is a way into that. And I think that Upbound has created a really fantastic feature set in Crossplane, and something that just gives you so many great benefits of auto-reconciling resources of any type. But you also heard Daniel say that people have used it for sending messages to Twitter. That's totally a possible use case. Actually, CockroachDB, who's another booth down here, and I run CockroachDB myself, sort of a thin layer over, I should say a compliance, Postgres compliance alternative to Postgres distributed. I believe there's a CockroachDB provider out there for Crossplane. So there's so many cool use cases in our industry. If you're just starting out and you're wondering, I wonder if I should do this Terraform thing or this Pulumi thing, or I would definitely encourage you to give Crossplane a shot. It's not everything is completely works with 100% the same coverage that something like the Terraform AWS provider does, but it does get very close in most cases. And actually, something that we didn't mention in Daniel's interview is the TerraJet providers. Those are 100% resource coverage of AWS, GCP, and Azure for anything that's represented within the official Terraform providers for those three big clouds. You can actually take advantage of using Crossplane. So it's pretty cool. And also, if you just don't want to get started with with deploying your own Crossplane management cluster, you can do that. You can get a free trial. Just Google Upbound Cloud, and you can start that today. So very shortly, we will be speaking with Jón Eðvald. I believe that's how you pronounce his last name, but I'll get confirmation on that in a few minutes. We'll be starting that in the next 5 minutes. This is also your chance to win the second of actually the third in all, because we did a giveaway yesterday of baby houseplants, personally curated by the team here at Garden. It's going to be different for each batch. The way that you win that giveaway is you're just going to tune in about 5 minutes, and then toward the end of the interview, you'll hear me say "until then," and then there's going to be 2 words after that, following that. So listen for those 2 words that I say after "until then," and then DM those 2 words to our Garden account on Twitter. That's Garden_IO, and DM those 2 words that you hear. My name is Tao Hansen. I just realized that I've maybe once introduced myself, but I'm not sure if I even used my full name. So I'm your host, Tao Hansen. I'm a developer advocate here at Garden. I'm I'm just so pleased working here. It's been such a blast in my 2 months, and I'm really I can't express enough my content and enthusiasm for working at a place like Garden that actually allows you to really creatively express yourself. I pitched these series of interviews and to Garden, and Garden was like, yeah, why not? Do a live stream from KubeCon. That sounds really cool. So I love working here. It's just an amazing workplace. If you're an engineer out there, SRE, for example, a site reliability engineer, or you're interested in delivery, this is go check out our job listings, and you might be able to work alongside this amazing team. So I'm going to speak to Jón now. Jón, why don't you come in front of the camera? Jón, could you introduce yourself to the audience? And I think I've been butchering your last name, so please can you also help me understand? Jón is Icelandic, as are the rest of our founders here. Yeah, introduce yourself. I've also been speaking about how Garden is actually hiring. If you could let the audience know what sort of roles we're hiring for, and if they're interested, where they might go to find those open roles.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'll start with my name.
Yeah.
So my name is Jón. I tend to go by Jón Eðvald or Jón Eðvald. The butchering is kind of fine. I lived in San Francisco for a couple of years. I rather got used to it. So don't feel bad.
How do you pronounce that? It's a special D. It's not printed here, but it's a special kind of D in the Icelandic language, right?
It is called an F.
F.
The way I pronounce it is Jón Eðvald.
Eðvald.
Like a soft TH sound.
Eðvald. Okay, very very cool.
My actual last name is Vignesson, but I tend to shorten it just a little bit.
Yeah. Every time I try and say something in Icelandic, I feel like I'm an original Viking again. It's fantastic. So where would somebody go if they're interested in working on this amazing with this amazing crew and team here?
Well, I mean, quite simply our website, garden.io. There's a garden.io/careers specifically, or you can just click the careers button at the top. We have an ever-expanding list of open positions. I think we've doubled the team size since January. We're growing quite fast, so I don't know if it's come up here, but we did raise our Series A. What's it, like 2-3 months now?
Since it
was official.
Yeah.
Time flies. My sense of time is kind of shot anyway over the last couple of years, but raised a healthy amount. You can actually read more about that on the website as well. And I'm so happy to be able to hire and grow the team, grow our little garden. We've been running a fairly small team for a while now, and now all of a sudden we have people in 6 different countries. So that's worth mentioning. We have a kind of a home base in Berlin, but we are hiring. I'm not going to say globally, like focusing on the U.S. and Europe and sort of those time zones. And when I say those time zones, yeah, sure, South Africa, totally fine. The geography doesn't really matter so much, but of course it's good to be able to communicate and have decent overlap in time zones. But yeah, we're stretching from the west coast of the USA to Berlin, or to Estonia, I think is the easternmost right now. And we're hiring on all fronts. A lot of product roles. We are building out our marketing team, so that's like content managers, content marketing, actually any kind of marketing. So that team is kind of fresh on our side. But yeah, we're hiring backend engineers, DevOps engineers, sales engineers, like technical account managers, customer success. Any kind of a marketing role I already mentioned. What am I forgetting? UI engineers, UI designers, the whole gamut. But basically, if you're interested in like solving developer problems, that's we have a lot of openings and we're looking to grow quite quickly.
Yeah, so Garden.io, look at the careers page. This is an amazing team. It feels like coming home after all my years in tech. It's really such a joyful place to work at, and a place of almost infinite creativity. So consider joining our team. I actually have a series of questions here. And we can of course go off script that I've prepared. But can you speak to us a little bit for those who are perhaps brand new, they've never heard of Garden before? We'll get into the technical part of it a little bit later, but where did the need for Garden actually sort of first fertilize? What's the origin story of Garden?
Well, I mean, I've joked that Garden is built in anger, or at least conceptualized in anger. And I mean that in like both sides of the word, like so anger as in battle. So I started thinking about these matters at my previous job. I was working in a company called Clue in Berlin. And, I was in a management role, but I was still a back-end engineer, especially when we were growing a team. And we were going through this transition from Heroku to initially Docker Cloud, then they abandoned that, and we found out. And then Kubernetes was just emerging as sort of the du jour standard way of going about things. And getting up and running on Kubernetes wasn't that hard. It didn't take us too long, but what caught me by surprise was really that the developer experience, the developer velocity, like completely ground to a halt. And it's not just because of Kubernetes specifically, it's also just when you have microservices, you have any sort of a complexity in your stack, you have all these different things that you can't really run them reliably on your laptop anymore, or at least it's sort of like a clumsy facsimile of the actual production environment. So I set about sort of, trying to fix it internally. I was always looking for something like Garden before starting Garden. But ended up packing together some tooling in, I think it was in Python, or a little bit of Python and TypeScript. And I see a lot of companies around here doing something similar. And it is a rabbit hole. And it just, it strikes me that it's kind of insane that how many companies, like thousands of companies and teams all over the world, are solving the same problem over and over again, with just like the slightest difference in emphasis and what they're focusing on, and then they have to build and maintain that, and then it goes out of fashion, it goes out of date, and then they're kind of stuck with it. So I just, I then started speaking to my now co-founders, and we realized, okay, there is a lot of flux happening in the space. Now is probably a good time to offer something new. Something is really designed for not just Kubernetes and containers, but rather just this brave new world of DevOps, and giving developers the tools that they need, because that's what DevOps is all about. Like, instead of other people operating your stuff, operators are basically giving developers self-service tools to help them help themselves. And sort of there's a bit of a shift in responsibility, but the tooling hasn't yet caught up. So we are part of that, global journey of making DevOps catch up to its expectations and its promise.
It does feel a little bit like we're supposed to be living in this, as our head of sales likes to say, the garden of earthly delights. It really ends up being more like the Hieronymus Bosch painting, where the demons are feasting on your body, and I think a lot of us remember like the good old days of coding, where you're just like noodling away on a cool little Python thing, and nowadays you sort of get jerked back to the present reality of pain, where you're working at a company and you've got flaky tests, but they only happen in CI/CD, or you have to wait for one thing or another before you can continue staying in that sweet code love loop, it really feels like Garden is trying to refocus on the original ambition of making coding something that was just playful and fun and directed without distraction and disruption.
Absolutely. I think you keep getting yanked out of your flow state endlessly. Like there's so many different things. It's partly a trade of distributed systems, and you have more points of failure and more different things that can go wrong. But even if you can still be just developing a monolith. It doesn't have to be that you're building like a massively distributed system. You still need a database, you still need to deploy your own thing, and it still needs to be quite similar to what it looks like in production. And as soon as you can kind of just those few steps, all of a sudden the tooling doesn't really cover what you want or need. And yeah, it's been, we're in this transition phase where it feels like a lot of kabuki to get simple things done. And I do miss those days, just like working on, just basic Python application, and just like do something and something happens, to keep my attention rolling. That's very important, because if you keep losing your focus every few minutes or for 20 minutes waiting for a CI pipeline, your mind starts to wander and like drift, and you keep context switching, and it's basically like, you're endlessly rearranging furniture in your head, like either waiting for something or switching between different things so as not to feel like you're just waiting. So there's only so much coffee you can drink in a day, and I think it's very important to really to tackle this problem head on, and you have to do it in a fundamentally different way, because we're changing the way we're doing things, and not just like, we don't just need like a faster something or a slightly better something. It needs to be rethought in terms of the entire software delivery flow. Garden is a deceptively ambitious project. We're focusing on a slice of the problem right now, but the idea is that you have a very consistent way to deploy, build, test throughout the entire delivery cycle.
Right. Yeah. Build, deploy, test. Those are really what Garden is the, let's say, the leverage to your experience. That was a little bit of the philosophy, the origin story of Garden. I'd love to get into the technical aspects of it. What are some of the features that you're most proud of, or let's say, actually, let's put it this way: what sort of features can a developer make use of today, and what are the features that are going to encounter the swiftest, and how would they get started if they're let's say they have a Docker a Docker enabled stack that they're running locally. How would they first sort of noodle around, and what can they expect to see as a benefit right away?
Well, so the first thing you want to do is, so the way you describe a system to Garden, and this is this is what you start by doing really. You can start really simple. You can just start with that one container image and just deploy that. You put a little bit of metadata next to your Docker file usually. Garden can initially create your Kubernetes manifest for you, so if you don't even have those, you can get off to a bit of a running start there.
Just the Docker file.
Yeah, just a Docker file and like a short garden.yaml, next to it, and you define a project. So then you have something that works. You run the Garden deploy. You might initially do it with Docker Desktop or Minikube or something on your laptop. Soon you're going to want, when you have a big old system, you might want to work with a remote cluster, and that's actually one of the biggest draws of Garden, is that you don't need Docker or Kubernetes on your laptop. I wrote a blog post to that effect about 2 years ago, and it caught a lot of attention. It's like, oh, I don't? With that sort of a laptop on fire as a banner image.
I've always dreaded and tried to find any reason not to click that Docker desktop Kubernetes checkbox because my machine has felt like it starts, the fans start going at full bore, and it feels like it's just going to take off into space.
Yeah, I mean, so which is not to knock Docker desktop, it's just those are technological constraints, and they're physical constraints of what your laptop is able to do and what it is designed to do. I mean, yeah, certainly you might want to run Docker for other reasons, but Kubernetes on your laptop, please no.
Please no.
And so yeah, we help teams get set up in such a way that they can actually use their remote clusters. And so usually the people that tend to come to us are like the DevOps engineers, the tooling teams, platform teams. They set up Garden for the rest of their organization. So and the very first steps, you start by one service at a time, see how it works, get a feel for it. You maybe run Garden Dev in your shell, and then we can start to think about live synchronizing code into a running container, because no matter how quickly your image is built, or they often don't, you maybe your web developers, they're not going to be happy with having to wait for a container build.
Yeah, that's called dev mode, right?
Yes, it is.
So this is another feature that Garden enables. Maybe you can explain a little bit about dev mode. I think dev mode is super cool. If a developer just wants to stay inside their workflow, what we call the inner loop, without being distracted, without having to worry about rebuilding the container, dev mode is actually something that enables you to stay in that loop, right?
Yeah, basically you shortcut the process like from code to deployed stack by synchronizing into a running container, which is fantastic. I think the most powerful use case is probably for the web developers, because they're used to such rapid feedback. They're editing CSS and they don't want to wait for a build. No, they're used to seeing that happen on their screen just as they type it. Yeah. So that's the sort of the most hardcore, like aggressive feedback loop that they, that you don't find other developers that are that impatient, let's say. And I get it. Like you're doing such rapid small iterations. Maybe for a backend developer, you thrive more on unit tests and things like that, so you're thinking about things a little bit differently. Even then, you want those to be updated as fast as possible. And maybe you're working on the two things at the same time. You want to sync those things together, you don't want to wait for builds. So dev mode, we've been doing demos here today and yesterday. Dev mode always catches people's attention, and I think it's a powerful feature. It's built around a tool called Mutagen. So Garden does a lot of the plumbing, but we work with the developer of Mutagen, which is a super powerful, really polished file synchronization tool. So it always works a treat. We've been very happy with that one.
Cool. Well, before we get into some of the other features, also, Garden is OSS. It's permissively licensed under the Mozilla Public License. We're looking for contributors, looking to expand the community of our beloved contributors. So if you think that's something for you, or if you just want to get started with Garden and then you have like a feature idea as you're working away, you're welcome to contribute. Please do. Before we get into some more of the both free and paid features, I wanted to talk a little bit about the stack graph. I didn't want to spend too much time on it. It's also, I would say it's the one part of Garden that I still don't fully understand yet, but I know that it's sort of, let's say, at the nucleus of what powers Garden, right? And allows a lot of these interesting features to emerge.
Yeah, it does seem a little bit intimidating. This is something that we're working on, just kind of make it a little bit easier to grok from the onset. But conceptually, it's actually quite simple. So to get from a bunch of Git repositories to a fully built, deployed, tested system, you need to build some things, deploy some things, test some things, maybe run things like database migration somewhere in. And this needs to happen in some sequence. With Garden, each of these can depend on one another. And that's how you describe your system. Basically, you put something next to, like I mentioned, like a Docker file. You put a little bit of metadata here. Here's how you build me, and here's how you test me is another one. Here's how you run a database migration, and here's how you deploy me. You put these things next to, like you deploy a Helm chart, you deploy a Kubernetes thing. That references a container image. It's just wiring all the things together that you might be currently doing with like a bash script or a makefile. It's just making it a little bit clearer and easier to understand. And this is the language that Garden speaks. This is what Garden works with, and this is how Garden works the same way from, I run it from my laptop. It's run automatically from a CI pipeline, because this is the blueprint from between repositories and built, deployed, tested system. That's what everything hinges on. And it is not, it's not conceptually complicated.
Is it what you would call a directed acyclic graph?
It is, a DAG.
A DAG, yes. Yeah.
Those are all the rage. I suppose, so I have a little bit of background in data science as well. So I was head of data science at a couple of different places before starting the company as well. And, I got to know tools like Airflow, where, you describe a graph where data flows through and it gets analyzed, and we have all these different steps. And it kind of struck me as, and you see the making of this with some CI systems, but it's not expressed in the same way. It's slightly like, then it's just like steps and scripts. One happens before the other. Right. We wanted to just make it a touch more specific, but it's still just the verbs that a developer uses like all day, every day. Like, I need to build something, I need to deploy it, I need to test it. We're just trying to map directly to that, and then this is what we visualize in our web UI, and this is what Garden actually performs when you run Garden deploy, Garden test.
So the advantage over something like a makefile would be, instead of a sequence that just runs all the way down, the stack graph knows the full dependency graph holistically and is able to sort of resolve for that.
That's correct, and this also powers the versioning mechanism. So, which is like, now we're getting a little bit more complicated territory. But I think it's important to mention because one thing that makes Garden smarter than many other tools is because, like, we know which file goes into which build, goes into which deployment, goes into which test, and so on and so forth. So when you edit a file, we can see how that tracks in the graph. When you run Garden test twice in a row without making any changes, nothing happens in a second run. This is crucial because mostly when you push to get into a CI pipeline, everything happens from scratch.
The whole CI/CD pipeline runs again.
Yeah, because it just doesn't know anything about what's inside your project. Yeah. It's just a sequence of bash scripts. So this is another thing that was very important for us to solve. And it kind of draws on, it's sort of like a very, very lightweight Bazel, like a build framework, which, is the type of thing that, big companies like Google use internally. Or internally, I guess they call it Blaze. We take some of those notions and make them far more accessible for your average team or average developer. But the key thing is that we know, based on which changes you've made, what actually has to be updated, what has to be redeployed to your environment, which tests have already been run. If I break something and then fix it, if I run my test and then break something and then fix it and run my tests again, the tests don't have to run again. Right. Because we already know that they worked based on the files that go into the deployments and go into the tests. And this, it's maybe not the most obvious benefit of Garden, but it is probably one of the more powerful elements of it.
Yeah, test caching, build caching, that's all something that Garden really allows because of actually the stack graph. So, if you're tired of waiting for your containers to rebuild, and you shouldn't have to, and together with Mutagen, we're actually able to get those code changes synced into the running container. Where you don't have to wait so long for those tests, for those builds to complete. You could just stay in your happy place and code away. I'd love to get into some of the new features coming to Garden. We can talk about the OSS side of things, but let's start with Stack Streams, which I believe is a paid feature of Garden. Correct? How should one divide their sort of attention between or nomenclature for Garden if they're just planning on using the free and open source part of it, and Garden the paid offering?
Sure. So we refer to Garden Core, and basically everything we've talked about so far is that's Garden Core. And then we have Garden Cloud and Garden Enterprise, which is basically just an enterprise version of Garden Cloud. So we have the two separate code bases.
That allows you to self-host the enterprise. You can do it on-prem if you need to.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So we have some larger or more compliance sensitive companies that need to self-host things, and then that is an option. So Garden Core is basically fundamentally a CLI tool, and that's sort of the engine. That's the thing that performs the build, interacts with your cluster, does the deployment, runs the test, kind of resolves the graph and all of that stuff. And that's what you run from your terminal, and all the individual commands like getting logs and like garden deploy and all that stuff. And that's the heart of the machine, or the core. Garden Cloud is a commercial product on top of that. So it's not a commercial version of the same thing. It is an entirely separate code base that is added on top. And that's something that we can either run for you or you can run for yourself in the guise of Garden Enterprise. And that brings secrets management like native to the Garden templating engine, so you can template secrets into your project.
So you don't have to bring your own Vault to the party.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is actually built on top of Vault. So
oh, there you go.
It is secure, but we've gone through the hassle. Let's put it that way.
Right.
And it's also, we just make native interfaces with the Garden configuration, so it's just nice and easy. Yeah. And that comes attached with role-based access controls, which is really important for larger organizations. Like only some people can deploy to the production or staging environments, or only the CI pipeline can do this. Or you can actually allocate individual keys to individual people, like if you have to provision something for an individual, that's also possible. And then, we have Stack Streams, which is basically a very, very powerful log viewer. It's super nice to use. And again, the stack ref comes into play because you can look at the logs for every build, every test, every service, and you can see it all interleaved on a timeline. You can either stack it or you can see it separately, and you can see what happens one before the other. And a simple example is like, I run a test suite, something fails, I can see how it travels from the test suite, calls the API, calls another service, errors, and then the test error comes up. So you can just kind of see very easily how stuff flows through your system. And what we're working on there as well is open tracing support. So you can actually see network traces attached to all of these.
Wow, so you get the network tracing as well? So you get some of the benefits of like if you're in an enterprise and you're using something like Jaeger for tracing, you can have that as part of your developer experience.
Exactly. So basically, like we're not like it's logs and tracing, and we're not like using any new data. You should if you already have this, you have what you need to drive the Stack Streams feature. It's just framed in a more development and testing oriented manner, which is you don't want to have to go to like insert log management tool and have to filter by what's the pod name for that, and kind of all the different tags and stuff. It's better to just have that all neatly organized for you and put on the same timeline. So it's really a pure UX boon to your day. It just puts everything at your fingertips, and we're very happy with it. We've been using it for a while and testing and getting feedback, and it's
Super cool. Yeah, and that's not the only feature coming to the cloud and enterprise. There's also some other ones like Cloud Builder. Are we prepared to share anything about that, or any other sort of paid or upcoming paid features?
I can mention a couple, maybe.
Okay. A feature preview for you.
Well, that's this is just live, right?
Yeah.
We're not recording this.
Well, I think we have multiple recording facilities, actually.
Okie dokie. Well, okay. So I can talk about a few things. So one thing it's an ostensibly simple thing that I'm quite excited about. Actually, is something we call secure provisioning. So basically, the idea always is that when a developer sits down or when a pipeline kicks off, Garden deploy just works from source to finish, as our tagline indicates. Sometimes you need like a certificate or a key provision from a third-party system, and you don't want to give developers or the CI pipeline the keys to make those keys, like the private keys to your public keys and things like that, or access to your DNS provider, and so on and so forth. Secure provisioning basically is an automation layer in Garden Cloud where you give Garden Cloud the keys to do that, and then the public keys get distributed. It's one of the things that we just see from users and customers, that this would make their lives a lot easier. So you don't have to do any sort of scripting around when you deploy Garden. but you can get like securely provisioned stuff like that. And it can also be like creating service accounts or creating, accounts in like third-party applications and things like that. So that's sort of an ops-oriented feature that I'm quite excited about. But you mentioned Cloud Builder, so I'll talk a little bit about it. So again, coming back to the stack graph, this ability of Garden to map from source files to builds to deploys, and our knowledge of what every single person on a team has built, has deployed, like throughout, and like who's done what, who has what caches, who has built which layers, and all that stuff, gives us an opportunity to develop something very interesting. Basically, we want to make your container builds faster without you ever having to think about any sort of like optimization. It's pre-optimized by Garden.
So no more like manual image layer caching.
Nope, none of that. I mean, you might still want to be sensible about how you structure your Docker files and things like that. You just follow the best practices, but basically nobody likes waiting for builds. It's such a big drag on developers. We have an opportunity to do something very clever there. So I won't get into further detail.
Very good. Well, that's just about it for our interview together with Jón Eðvald. I think I got that right this time. If we remember, this is the second giveaway that we're doing today. Our last giveaway was with the CEO William Morgan of Buoyant, creators of the first service mesh and also the simplest service mesh, Linkerd. We did a giveaway there at the end of his interview, and we're doing a giveaway in this interview now. So remember, the details to enter and win is, I will say, until then, and 2 words following that. What you need to do, all you need to do, is listen for those 2 words following until then, and then you're going to DM our Twitter account, which is at garden_io. DM that Twitter account right after you've heard these 2 words following until then, and then you'll be entered into winning the last 6 baby houseplants, professionally curated by your team here at Garden. So we're going to say it together. It's and I think it's we agreed on it last night. So that's going to be until then.
Scale out.
Scale out. That's it. Scale out. Okay. Thank you, Jón. We have our final interview coming up. That's going to be with Jens. I've already forgotten how to pronounce his last name. I went by SysEleven's booth earlier, and my poor American mind was unable to grasp the last name into my memory. But we're going to have our last interview of the day with Jens. He is I see him now. He's the CTO of SysEleven, a German cloud provider. Also, let's maybe move a little bit closer. Yeah, come on in. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome. Good, I'm great. How are you, Jens?
Fine. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. I don't know if anybody knows this, but if you're looking for the best party in town, you need to follow SysEleven's crew. They had a DJ at their booth the other day, which just turned wild. It was easily the best thing at this conference.
This is not a professional DJ. It's our head of sales.
It's the head of sales that was DJing. He did an incredible job. One of the reasons why I wanted to bring on SysEleven today for this interview is just their enthusiasm for putting out great products. They actually, together with Kubernetes, have developed their own. I would almost call it like a Kubernetes seed cluster that functions as kind of a management cluster of other clusters, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what we are doing.
Yeah.
And we call it MetaCube. So this is our brand for them. And fortunately, we have in the last 2 years we got a lot of experiences with customers on that, and also we did in the last 2 years lots of on top. So, for instance, we developed a new shared repository where we bring up open source tooling, which is curated to the customer that they can insert it in their pipeline. So that helps the customer to be sure that all the used tooling is enterprise graded and dependency free in terms of Kubernetes, in terms of Kubernetes versions.
That's
so
cool.
This is very, very, has a big value for the customer.
Yeah, and say your last name for me. Is it Jens Plogsties? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, yeah. So Jens is the CTO of SysEleven. We're honored to have him here. Yeah, let's get into Metacube a little bit. I actually have taken some notes here. So I wanted to talk about Metacube. Now, viewers might not know this, but I was a former customer of SysEleven's.
Yeah, I know.
Two companies back.
Yeah.
For a company called Family that makes childcare software. And I had a great experience with SysEleven. They have such knowledgeable engineers on their team. And this Metacube product allows you to not only spin up Kubernetes clusters very easily using the Terraform provider, which is managed by your team, but also allows you to you talked about these enterprise-graded software that people can deploy to it. Are these the Metacube building blocks?
It's a Metacube building block.
Can you go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, we call it Metacube building block. So when you imagine you have tons of CNCF tools like RabbitMQ, Valero, database operators, and so on. There's a really big jungle. Yeah. So and when you pick up it from open source, you're not really sure it is running. It is scales out in a horizontal way. So this is always you're in doubts, and that was the reason why we sit down and thought about it. How can we bring up such tooling in an enterprise created value to the customer? And what we are sticking on the GitOps definition, and we developed a shared repository based on GitLab, and offer the customer to pick up curated tooling from this repository and put it in their CI/CD pipeline and deploy it on their own cluster, which is based on our Metacube environment, on our infrastructure. So the customer doesn't take care about dependencies in direction of on vanilla Kubernetes, and also he doesn't take care about the dependency to each other. So it means RabbitMQ, Valero, and so on, different versions. You have a life cycle to consider, and we are testing this stuff. It is running together in a Metacube cluster or not. If not, then we have to patch it, we have to change it, we have to reconfigure it, all this stuff.
So it's all maintenance free, rather than like deploying the Helm chart of Valero to your cluster. You get it bespoke, and it's all taken care of, maintained, upgraded for you.
Yeah, it's based on YAML. So YAML makes the customer happy because it's simple to understand.
Right.
It's simple to handle. So he have the flexibility to use it. He can decide it by them own self. So it's not forced by us. Yeah. So it's his decision to use it or not. He can also, using older versions or different configuration YAMLs, templates, for that he can customize this configuration templates. So that's free. So this flexibility is very important for the customer because normally he has no really good experience with the application, how they run on a cluster in Kubernetes, how the microservices work to each other. So he needs the flexibility to reconfigure stuff, and we offer this. So, and he don't have to call us; he can do it by himself. So, and that's the story, and it helps a lot.
Oh wow, great! Fantastic. You have a new Metacube operator, actually. Maybe you could go into a little bit of detail on what the Metacube operator does. It's fairly new, no?
It's fairly new.
Yeah.
So the Metacube operator is the definition on the customer give us the 100% responsibility. So when the customer had no fun to deploy their own stuff, they bring up workload from an on-premise environment to us, or he don't want to operate this, to maintain this, to consider the life cycle or something. Then he can use Metacube operator, he can book this, and he gets people which helps him to ramp up the knowledge that they can use our building blocks, our Metacube accelerator building blocks, for their own purpose, and until he can do it by themselves, we are part of the game. Yeah. So.
Okay, so the Metacube operator sort of places the responsibility of provisioning these resources, maintaining these resources on SysEleven, whereas the building blocks really puts the burden of support or let's say maintenance on the customer. So it just depends on what sort of level of burden of maintenance and support they want.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly the idea behind. We in the past we had a lot of customers or potential customers. They have a huge on-premise environment. So and they want to go in a cloud. They want to use Kubernetes. They want to use microservices. They separate their own applications in microservices so that they can spawn it in containers. But they have no idea how Kubernetes is working, how a cloud is working, because they were running on an on-premise environment. And that's the reason why we help them. And this first deployment, this first architecture, this is really a hard step for the customer. And we are part of this. We have solution architects. They will support them. They will help them until they know it by themselves. They can do it by themselves.
Mm-hmm. So if a customer also is, perhaps somebody is coming from another data center, another company, and they don't even know Kubernetes, actually that's something that you that you provide a level of support where you can even onboard them onto Kubernetes.
Yeah, we can exactly. We help them to onboard on Kubernetes. Also, lift and shift is not a linear stuff. Yeah, so you have also to. In normal cases, you have to rebuild your clusters or your architecture, and this is that's what we are taking care for. And the building blocks only, the customer can use it in a self-service. But if they don't find or not have the right capacity for that, the right resources, then we can take it over that we are doing the service for the customer as well. Mm-hmm. This is Metacube operator, and the customer can book this. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Something that I thought was cool when, cool in general is just how much SysEleven relies on and supports, is built on top of open source technologies, such as OpenStack. Actually, SysEleven, when you go to create a cluster or you go to, SysEleven gives you the option of choosing a larger cloud, such as AWS. What are the full sort of list of other clouds that you support?
Yeah, we support AWS and Azure as well. So we have a cloud provider for that. So that means you can spawn with Metacube, with our orchestration platform, with our Terraform provider. You can spawn clusters on AWS or in Azure. That works very good and very well. What we are currently working for is to find a solution where the customer can separate the workload in two different sections. So maybe you have more sensitive workload, which has hard compliance requirements.
For GDPR reasons, for example.
Exactly, GDPR reasons. He can decide to put this workload on our infrastructure because we have German data centers and which are certified. And for not so hard restricted data, he can use AWS or Azure. and bring both worlds together in one orchestration layer. This is what we are currently working for, and I hope we can release it very soon.
So yeah, so it would this upcoming feature really allows you to have a very easy multi-cloud experience without all of the headache that so many companies often take on trying to go multi-cloud. With the upcoming feature, you can very easily spawn some pods in the OpenStack, your own data centers in Germany. For those GDPR-sensitive workloads, but then you can also have your workloads on AWS and Azure if you want.
And that's in one project. Yeah. So we can, for sure, the customer can use it today you can use it today, but he has to separate the projects for that. So and this is very uncomfortable. Yeah, because I would like to have functionality only once and not in both projects. So. And to bring these worlds together in one project, that's what we are working for currently. So this is a very interesting topic.
Would you say this this feature sounds so cool? Is that next quarter?
Oh no, next quarter that's too short. Okay. So I hope this year. Yeah.
Hopefully this year you'll be able to run your workloads easily across all sorts of clouds, including the very own of SysEleven. I wanted to talk a little bit about, and this is pretty exciting news, I think it actually happened during KubeCon, where the pen was put to the paper. I had to check with their marketing team if it was okay to actually let this be known on a live stream, but SysEleven has just been acquired, is that correct, by Secunet?
Yeah, that's really, that's the case, and we're really happy about it. Yeah. So, that's new since Tuesday. And and we'll see what's going on there. Yeah. So together with this really big knowledge, with this experience in terms of security and on-premise environment, so we hope that we get a really big push in the market. So I cannot say so much in detail because we started the journey, and now we have to think about how can we do these things together and. Bring the synergies on the road.
Yeah.
So, it's more, I cannot say more now.
That's fine. Thank you so much for joining us. This was a great talk, and I'm really exciting to see the direction of Metacube within this year, and also the building blocks and the operator which were recently launched that just make it really easy for customers to get their software deployed in an enterprise compliant way. It's been vetted by the SysEleven team. If someone is interested in getting started with SysEleven, where would you recommend they go to, or how should they reach out?
First of all, you have to look on our homepage, www.syseleven.de, and on the homepage you will find the right contacts. You will easily get contact to a salesperson. We have a very technical sales, so there's deep insight to the technical environment and can explain a lot. Also, we have some pre-sales guys which have a very deep can do a very deep dive in the customer existing system, so to support him from the first line, what is necessary, what is not necessary, so we can design the system easily, so that he can really get a tailored offering, which is exactly what the customer needs.
Yeah, I can personally attest to that. I know both pre-sales Sasha and sales Felix. They're incredibly knowledgeable, incredibly passionate members of the SysEleven team. Just open a chat. Even if you're just curious, and you'll really feel the sense of care for your company's needs from the beginning.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jens. Yes. So this was our last interview of the day with Jens Plogsties, the CTO of SysEleven. Thank you so much. I'll see you back at your booth. Yeah. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye. Wow, what a day it's been. my entire body is in pain. I have not eaten. I have not sat down since we started these interviews today. So, but I really enjoyed them. I get filled with so much energy talking to so many bright, motivated individuals who are so passionate about technology and the cloud and what is possible with Kubernetes at KubeCon. If you're somebody who has considered coming to KubeCon before but has not come down, it's really I cannot stress how amazing it is to be in a room filled with your peers of just really, really smart people who love the work they do. I was your host, or I am your host, Tao Hansen. I'm the developer advocate here at Garden, and I had so much fun doing these interviews with you all today. I hope that everyone has had their chance to participate in the last of the giveaways, and yeah, I wish you a very good rest of your day, and enjoy life. Seek joy. Thank you very much.